when a young woman suddenly stopped answering her phone and disappeared without a trace. Her family immediately knew something was terribly wrong. Police got involved, confident they'd solve the case quickly. After all, she'd been house-sitting in a quiet Michigan neighborhood where nothing unusual ever happened. But what unfolded felt less like a typical missing person case and more like the start of a dark crime story. A car found deep in the woods, a body discovered in a basement, a confession that didn't make sense, and evidence pointing everywhere except where detectives claimed it did. What no one realized then was that this was only the beginning. When the truth finally came out, more than 10 years later, it didn't just devastate her family. It exposed major failures within the justice system and left people across the country in disbelief. To understand how everything went so wrong, we have to return to where it all started, with a young woman named Andrea Eilber. Andrea Eilber was born on April 17, 1991, in Flint, Michigan. Her mother passed away when she was a child, and her father later remarried. The family eventually settled in the small town of Otisville, where Andrea completed high school. After graduating, she took a job at a nearby supermarket. She thought about going to college but was still unsure of a specific direction, so she continued working and saving for the future. At work, she met Kenneth Grondin, a 19-year-old co-worker. The two soon began dating. In November 2011, when Andrea was 20, her aunt and uncle left town and asked her to help house sit. At that time, she was still living with her parents, but decided to temporarily move to her aunt and uncle's house to help look after their home. For the first few days, Kenneth and a friend visited her there. They hung out, watched movies, and enjoyed each other's company. Andrea and Kenneth later made plans to spend the evening of November 14 together. She was supposed to pick him up, but shortly before then, she texted to say she couldn't make it. Instead, she asked him to go to her aunt and uncle's house, bringing some movie DVDs. Kenneth arrived around 7:30 p.m., but the house was dark, locked, and Andrea's car was gone. After knocking with no response, he tried calling her, but she didn't answer. Assuming she had stepped out, he decided to wait. About half an hour later, Andrea texted him again, saying her plans had changed and they would see each other the next day. She didn't explain where she was, and she didn't respond to any more of Kenneth's messages. The next day passed with no word from Andrea. At first, only Kenneth was worried. Since Andrea was staying at her aunt and uncle's house, her father wasn't concerned when he didn't hear from her right away. But after another day without contact, he began to worry. He asked a relative to check on her, and she went to the house with Kenneth. They looked through the windows and walked around but found no one there. Andrea's father started calling her friends, and none had heard from her for over 24 hours. The family began to fear something was wrong and organized a search. Family and friends split into groups, driving through nearby towns, parks, and other places Andrea might have gone. That evening, one of her friends found her car parked in a remote area near a national park, just a few miles from her relative's home. The car doors were unlocked, the keys were missing, and Andrea was not there. Her father immediately called the police. With Andrea's uncle's consent, the police broke into the house. In the basement, they made a terrible discovery. Andrea was sitting in a chair with a gunshot wound to her head. The medical examiner determined she had been killed by a single gunshot fired from several feet away. She had died 2 days earlier. On the same night, she canceled her plans with Kenneth. The coroner also found marks on Andrea's wrists, indicating she had been bound with plastic tape, although the tape was missing when the body was found. The analysis suggested the ties had been removed 6 or 7 hours after her death, raising the possibility that the killer either returned later or stayed in the house for hours afterward. Investigators noted that some items were missing from the home, but it didn't appear to be a typical burglary. Most valuables were left untouched. The missing items included a bottle of perfume, a sweater, a camera, 3 knives, a rifle, ammunition, and some cash. Jewelry, and even a piece of solid gold in plain sight, were left behind. While crime scene technicians searched the house, detectives learned that Andrea had a boyfriend named Kenneth and went to question him. Kenneth explained when he'd last seen Andrea and willingly gave DNA and fingerprint samples. The police confiscated the clothes he wore that night and searched his home, but found nothing suspicious. Despite this, detectives continued to question Kenneth, and over time they began to suspect that he might be the killer. Kenneth denied the accusation and took a polygraph test, which indicated no signs of deception. He said that on the night of November 14th, Andrea had suddenly canceled their plans, and he had been heartbroken. He assumed she was planning to break up with him. Upset, he went home, charged his phone, and texted a female friend, telling her that he thought Andrea was about to leave him. They messaged for a while, and then Kenneth drove to the store where she worked. The two talked more about the situation, and eventually, she invited him to join her and her roommate for a movie night. Kenneth arrived at their place around 10:00 p.m., which both women later confirmed. His phone data supported his story, showing his phone connected to a nearby cell tower at that time. About 20 minutes before arriving, a gas station camera caught him on camera. That same night, someone withdrew $300 from Andrea's bank account in the town of Davidson, about a 30-minute drive from her uncle's house. What's noteworthy is that this transaction took place only 7 minutes after Kenneth arrived at his friend's house. Far too short a time for him to have traveled between the two places. Nevertheless, the police have not yet removed him from the list of suspects. Kenneth stayed with his friends until around midnight and then went home. The next morning, he tried calling Andrea several times, but she didn't answer. Worried, he drove to her uncle's house around 10:00 a.m. and knocked on the door, but no one answered. He left and was back home by about 11:00 a.m., something confirmed by his family and his phone's data. Around that same time, another $300 was withdrawn from Andrea's account, this time in a different, more distant town. Police obtained surveillance footage of the person using the card. The image was too blurry to identify the suspect, but it showed a white pickup truck at the scene. Despite the evidence suggesting Kenneth's innocence, detectives still had doubts. They thought parts of his story didn't make sense. Kenneth admitted that he drove to Andrea's uncle's house around the time of her death and sat in the car outside for about 30 minutes, which struck detectives as odd. On top of that, when Andrea's friends and family organized a search for her on the evening of November 15th, Kenneth said he couldn't join because he had to work early the next day. Later, he told detectives he had already spent the day looking for Andrea and calling her repeatedly, assuming she was ignoring him. He believed she wanted to end the relationship, not that something bad had happened. Another concern arose when a friend of Kenneth's, who was helping with the search, asked for Andrea's uncle's home address. Kenneth gave him the wrong location, about 3 miles from the actual house. Investigators thought this was strange because Kenneth had been there many times before. Although there was still no solid evidence against him, detectives kept pressing. After more than 10 hours of questioning, police claimed Kenneth had confessed. In his affidavit, Kenneth said he went to Andrea's uncle's house that night, entered, and discovered her body in the basement. He said he thought she had hurt herself and decided to stage the crime to look like a murder so her family wouldn't know. He admitted to taking a few items that were nearby but didn't provide many details beyond that. Kenneth's confession was short, unclear, and filled with vague wording. He insisted he hadn't killed Andrea. He only claimed to have found her body. Still, detectives believed they finally had enough evidence and arrested him. As soon as they charged him with murder, Kenneth tried to take back his statement. He explained that detectives had interrogated him for hours, bombarding him with accusations until he was completely worn down. Eventually, they told him that if he wrote down a version of events where he simply discovered Andrea's body, he could go home. Believing them, Kenneth complied. But that statement became the centerpiece of the case against him. Kenneth also said detectives repeatedly deceived him. They claimed to have solid forensic evidence linking him to the crime and told him he had failed the polygraph test miserably. It was later revealed that his grandfather had hired a lawyer and sent a lawyer to the station to help. When the lawyer tried to locate Kenneth, one detective hung up on him and warned others not to disclose Kenneth's whereabouts. The lawyer spent the entire day making calls. But no officer would provide information. Kenneth, unaware that his lawyer was trying to contact him, continued to speak privately with the detectives. He later said his confession was nothing more than him repeating what they told him to say, hoping to finally go home. In truth, Kenneth claimed he didn't even know Andrea was dead. Less than a day after Andrea's body was found, detectives announced they had found a suspect. Kenneth's family and friends refused to believe he was involved. But there was little they could do. Police ended their investigation, convinced his confession would be enough to convict him. Forensic evidence, however, told a different story. Experts tested multiple samples from the crime scene, including skin under Andrea's fingernails. The DNA belonged to an unknown man, not Kenneth. A second sample found in Andrea's car matched the same unidentified person. Then there was Andrea's bank card. Someone had been withdrawing her money, but it wasn't Kenneth. Despite these red flags, detectives claimed to have found new evidence. When one officer opened the sealed bag containing Kenneth's clothes from the night Andrea disappeared, he noticed a single bloody hair stuck to Kenneth's pants. Tests showed that the hair and blood were both Andrea's. But strangely, the pants were completely bloodless. Forensic experts concluded that the hair could have been attached after Andrea died. Because if Kenneth had really killed someone while wearing those pants, there would have been blood splatter. Kenneth's lawyer argued that the hair could have been contaminated during the process of collecting evidence. Kenneth's clothes were confiscated only 30 minutes after the body was found, so it is highly likely that the police accidentally got the hair on them while processing the scene. The lawyer also asked the court to dismiss Kenneth's confession, arguing that police had blocked him from seeing his client during questioning. In addition, parts of the interrogation video had mysteriously disappeared. Precisely the moments when, according to Kenneth, detectives were feeding him the answers. The legal battle lasted 4 years before the court finally ruled that the confession would remain admissible. During that time, Kenneth was out on bail but strictly monitored. He wore a GPS ankle tracker and needed police approval to leave his home. When the trial began in 2015, the prosecution relied mainly on 2 pieces of evidence, Kenneth's confession and the bloody hair found on his pants. Their theory was that he had killed Andrea during a robbery. Even though none of the stolen items were found in his possession and her bank card had clearly been used by someone else, the prosecutor tried to explain the inconsistencies by claiming the robbery was staged. He argued that Kenneth killed Andrea to steal her money and property, but also claimed that he had staged the crime scene to create a distraction. This reasoning was weak, especially since Kenneth came from a wealthy family and didn't need the money. The prosecutor also stressed that there was no sign of forced entry and that Kenneth had a spare key to Andrea's uncle's house. Andrea had given it to him just a few days before she died, so he could visit any time. Kenneth, however, insisted he had left the key inside the house 2 days before her death. A friend who was with him at the time confirmed this account, and police later found the spare key exactly where Kenneth had said it would be. The defense argued that the case was filled with inconsistencies and that the investigation was poorly handled. They pointed out a detail the police seemed to overlook. Andrea's car had been taken and later abandoned a few miles from her house. Her father testified that the car constantly leaked oil under the driver's seat, which always left Andrea's shoes stained. By that logic, anyone who drove her car would have oil on their shoes as well. But when investigators examined Kenneth's boots, there wasn't any trace of oil. The prosecutor then changed the theory, suggesting Kenneth had an accomplice. In this version, Kenneth killed Andrea while the accomplice took the stolen items. drove off in her car, and used her bank card. Another major issue for the prosecution was that the murder weapon was never found. Police confirmed that the missing rifle from Andrea's uncle's house and Kenneth's parents' gun did not match the bullet that killed her. Kenneth's lawyer argued that the police had ignored other possible suspects because they were fixated on Kenneth from the start. To support this, the defense presented 5 alternative suspects. At the top of the list was Jeffrey, a mutual acquaintance of Kenneth and Andrea. There were several suspicious details about him. He was the one who conveniently found Andrea's car early in the search, even though it was parked miles away in a secluded area. That same day, he called Kenneth asking about Andrea, even though Kenneth had never given him his phone number. Investigators later learned Andrea had written Kenneth's number on a piece of paper that was found on her nightstand next to a spot where unidentified DNA was recovered. Jeffrey also owned a car that looked very similar to the one caught on surveillance footage when someone used Andrea's bank card at a gas station. Andrea's brother mentioned another possible suspect, a banned substance dealer. He admitted that he had been struggling with addiction and owed the dealer money. According to her brother, the dealer knew Andrea saved money from her job. So, her brother suspects the dealer may have killed her to collect the debt. Police also investigated a young man named David after his father reported that he might have been involved in Andrea's murder. David had a criminal record for car theft and assault, and resembled the person seen on the surveillance video using Andrea's bank card. Despite all these leads, detectives said they found no solid evidence connecting any of these suspects to the crime. When the trial ended, the jury deliberated for 2 days before finding Kenneth guilty of first-degree murder. He received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. His attorney immediately filed an appeal. The defense first argued that Kenneth's confession was coerced and that police had denied him legal counsel. But the court rejected those claims. Next, they appealed the robbery conviction, pointing out that Kenneth had also been found guilty of theft even though none of the stolen items were ever recovered. That appeal also failed. However, in their third attempt, Kenneth's lawyer found a significant error in the jury paperwork. Jurors had been given 2 separate murder charges to consider, first-degree and second-degree. For the first-degree charge, they could choose between guilty or not guilty. But for second-degree murder, the only option listed was guilty. This meant the jury had no way to find Kenneth not guilty of the lesser charge. They were forced to decide only how guilty he was. The appeals court could not overlook such a major procedural flaw. In 2018, Kenneth was granted a new trial after spending 3 years in prison. Following the ruling, he was released on bail again. His lawyer continued to push for new evidence that could identify the real killer, repeatedly urging police to re-examine the existing DNA samples. In 2022, investigators finally agreed to conduct a new review. At that point, Kenneth's retrial had still not started, and he remained free on bail. Forensic experts reanalyzed all unidentified male DNA connected to the case, but there were still no matches in the FBI database. They then decided to focus on the strongest piece of evidence, a cigarette butt found outside Andrea's uncle's house. This sample matched the same man whose DNA had been found under Andrea's fingernails. Confirming he was the true killer, investigators sent the cigarette butt to Arthrom, a company specializing in genetic genealogy. In January 2023, experts made a breakthrough. By using public genetic databases and tracing family connections, they identified a possible suspect, a 42-year-old man named Chadwick Mobley, who had not appeared in the original investigation. Detectives discovered that Chadwick lived in a town about 40 minutes away from the crime scene when Andrea was murdered. His phone records from November 2011 showed that on the day Andrea was killed, his phone connected to a tower near her aunt and uncle's home 23 times. By 2023, Chadwick was living in Utah, working as a delivery driver and living out of his van. Investigators asked local police to secretly collect an item containing his DNA. But because he often stayed in open areas, surveillance proved difficult. After 2 months of monitoring, officers still hadn't retrieved anything usable, so detectives decided to confront him directly. With a warrant in hand, they approached Chadwick and collected a DNA sample. He denied any involvement, but lab tests soon confirmed his DNA was under Andrea's fingernails, inside her car, and in multiple locations at the crime scene. When police searched his van, they also found a revolver. Ballistic analysis proved it was the weapon used to kill Andrea. 2 days later, police went to follow up, but Chadwick had fled. 3 weeks later, authorities tracked him to Montana near the Canadian border, where he was caught, but while being extradited to Michigan, he escaped from a police car. Despite being handcuffed and shackled, a few days later, a local sheriff spotted him by chance, paddling down a river in a canoe. That led to his second capture. This time, he was successfully brought back to Michigan and placed in custody without bail. As he had already escaped twice, Chadwick pleaded not guilty, and prosecutors began preparing their case. For local law enforcement, it was a humiliating turn of events. After more than a decade of insisting Kenneth was the killer, the new evidence, including DNA under Andrea's fingernails and the murder weapon, now pointed unmistakably to Chadwick. Investigators looked into whether Kenneth and Chadwick had any connection. Maybe they'd worked together or crossed paths? But they found none. The two men were complete strangers, and Andrea didn't know Chadwick either. At the time of her murder, Chadwick was 32 and living in a nearby town with no link to her. Despite all the new evidence, Kenneth's conviction remained in place. He continued to live under strict monitoring, wearing an ankle bracelet. Prosecutors even intensified their efforts, announcing their intention to hold a second trial based on the theory that Kenneth and Chadwick had committed the murder together. That second trial never happened for Chadwick. In February 2025, he entered a no-contest plea, meaning he wouldn't fight the charges but also wouldn't admit guilt. He told the judge he'd been extremely drunk the night Andrea was killed and couldn't remember what had happened. Though he didn't deny being involved, during the hearing, an alarming detail surfaced. Investigators had actually considered Chadwick a suspect early in the case. However, for reasons no one could explain, his name was never officially added to the case file. By then, detectives had already focused on Kenneth. Ignoring the DNA mismatch and the missing murder weapon, Chadwick Mobley was ultimately sentenced to life in prison without parole. In court, he apologized to Andrea's family. For Kenneth, though, nothing changed. His lawyer immediately requested that the charges be dropped, but prosecutors refused, claiming that Chadwick's conviction didn't rule out Kenneth's involvement. They vowed to proceed with a second trial. Chadwick insisted he didn't know Kenneth or Andrea and had acted alone. Nevertheless, the state continued to pursue the case. The new trial for Kenneth is scheduled for January 2026. He remains under house arrest as his defense team builds his case, supported by a respected forensic expert who re-examined the bloodied hair on Kenneth's pants. The expert confirmed earlier findings that the hair must have ended up there several hours after Andrea's death, not during the murder. Considering all the evidence, the DNA results, the recovered weapon, Chadwick's conviction, and the forensic analysis, Kenneth now has a strong chance of clearing his name. But the toll has been immense. 14 years of his life are gone. Years spent behind bars and confined to his home. Even if the courts finally recognize his innocence, he'll never recover that lost time. And if he decides to seek justice against the officers and prosecutors responsible, that battle could last many more years. With no certainty he'll ever be fully vindicated. Moldova, December 2020. In the courtroom, silence reigns, broken only by the occasional click of camera shutters. On the defendant's bench sits 21-year-old Anna Lajkovic, a medical student. These are her first public hearings since her arrest, and her behavior shocks everyone present. She does not hide from the cameras. She reclines casually on the bench, cleaning her nails, smiling as if she were at a fashion shoot, rather than in court. The prosecutor read the indictment. Anna was convicted of the murder of her mother, Dr. Praskovia Lajkovic. She listens silently, her gaze vacant and indifferent. Moldova is a small Eastern European state, nestled between Ukraine and Romania. Since the collapse of the Soviet Union, the country has struggled for decades with poverty, political instability. Salaries are among the lowest in Europe. Thousands of citizens leave each year to work abroad, and corruption remains pervasive. In European rankings, Moldova consistently occupies the lowest positions, surpassed only by a few other post-Soviet states. Amid this general decline, the autonomous region of Gagauzia stands out. Located in the south of the country, roughly 60 miles from the capital, it is a territory with special status and its own parliament. The local population, mostly Gagauz, live modestly. Working in agriculture and small businesses, unemployment is higher here than in other regions. Yet, among ordinary homes, one can spot mansions built by those who tapped into local political or commercial structures. Anna was born in Comrat, the capital of Gagauzia, into a family whose status contrasted sharply with most others. The Lajkovic, Aladov family was among those in Moldova who lived by their own rules. Anna's father, Vasily Aladov, was a well-known entrepreneur and politician in Gagauzia, deeply involved in the region's public life. He owned several plots of land and companies whose income often did not match the figures in official reports. He faced repeated investigations on suspicion of financial irregularities and budget manipulation. Yet all cases were eventually closed without consequence. Vasily Aladov attempted twice to become governor of Gagauzia. Both campaigns ended in scandal. The first, disqualified due to insufficient verified signatures. The second, after the Ministry of Justice uncovered forged documents and signs of vote tampering. Despite his failed bids, he retained a position in local government and continued his business activities. Maintaining a reputation as a powerful figure, few dared to challenge. Anna's mother, Praskovia Lajkovic, came from a very different background. A physician by training, she graduated from medical school with honors, worked closely with clinics in Germany. Her career took her between Moldova and Germany, often traveling for assignments. She was regarded as a self-made woman, a model of intelligence and hard work. She provided her daughter with comfort, educational opportunities, and professional connections. The marriage between Vasily and Praskovia was short-lived, as their ambitions and outlooks clashed. After the divorce, Vasily quickly remarried, and Anna gained a half-brother from that union. Despite her parents' separation, Anna's financial situation remained unchanged. She was raised in a world of abundance, little oversight. In her world, money solved everything. Boundaries were non-existent. She was granted near-complete freedom, indulging in impulsive behavior and facing few consequences for school conflicts. Any criticism from teachers or school staff was often followed by those individuals losing their jobs at her parents' behest. Over time, this shaped a personality that didn't recognize limits. Someone who believed every problem could be resolved through connections or wealth. It was her father's political influence, her mother's career success, and the complete lack of structure that formed the basis of Anna Lajkovic's worldview. From a young age, Anna lived in what could be described as a gilded cage, a world where everything revolved around her. Her parents provided everything they believed symbolized success: private schooling, international travel. However, they neglected core elements of upbringing, such as discipline, responsibility, and boundaries. Praskovia, constantly juggling business trips and her medical career. Tried to compensate for her absences with gifts, attention whenever possible. Vasily, with his influence and access, never denied Anna anything. Whatever she wanted, a new item, a vacation, a spot in an elite event, was granted without discussion. No was not part of their vocabulary. Household staff never stayed long. According to people familiar with the family, nannies and helpers frequently faced rude behavior and temperamental demands. This same pattern played out at school. When teachers offered criticism, Anna responded aggressively, and her parents intervened to resolve matters with the administration. Over time, she absorbed a simple lesson. When things didn't go her way, it was someone else's fault. Psychologists describe this kind of upbringing as a breeding ground for narcissistic traits. A young person raised in such an environment can grow up believing their wants matter more than anything else. In Anna's case, that belief was only reinforced by her family's wealth and influence. In a world where money replaced authority, boundaries eventually disappeared altogether. Former classmates recalled that Anna always carried herself as someone special. She craved the spotlight, couldn't handle criticism, and believed she deserved to be treated differently. Even minor slights were taken as personal offenses, and genuine emotional connection seemed to be missing entirely. People were, to her, more like tools for getting what she wanted. By the time she reached her teenage years, this behavior pattern was firmly established. Empathy never took root because neither her family nor her surroundings modeled it. Over time, Anna developed a personality marked by confidence, isolation, and a lack of internal limits. She didn't grasp the line between acceptable and unacceptable behavior. By the time Anna entered college, she had a clear understanding of her advantages, on her appearance, her financial freedom, and a life largely free from rules. After finishing high school, she enrolled in medical school at a university in Russia. She performed well academically, but her interest in medicine ran shallow. For her, studying medicine wasn't about helping others. It was about building an image. It aligned with her desire for status, something she could showcase publicly. Alongside school, she began experimenting with modeling. At first, it was small gigs, photo shoots for local agencies, minor runway events, and commercials. Success in that world deepened her sense of being exceptional. She started attending more social events, networking with young entrepreneurs and influencers. Around this time, she launched her Instagram account, which quickly became her primary tool for self-promotion. Her feed was carefully curated: designer outfits, European vacations, upscale restaurants, exclusive parties, luxurious hotel stays, and a depiction of unconstrained campus life. Each post projected the image of a budding European influencer, a young woman who combined brains, beauty, and independence. By 2020, she had over 10,000 followers, a substantial audience in Moldova, a country with just over 2 million people. The more Anna flaunted her polished lifestyle, the more she craved validation. Likes and comments became a measure of her worth. When she is not given regular attention, she feels anxious, irritable. Eventually, her need for quick gratification spilled beyond social media. It began with alcohol at parties and events, then escalated to stronger substances. The crowd she spent time with didn't see this as a problem. Using illegal substances was viewed as part of the European leisure scene. Outwardly, Anna still looked poised and polished, but mentally, she was beginning to unravel. Her parents tried to intervene. Scovia hired a therapist, hoping regular sessions would help stabilize her daughter. However, therapy didn't work. Anna saw it as an attempt to control her and refused to engage in meaningful conversations about her behavior. By that point, a growing emotional distance had formed between them. Over time, Anna's reliance on substances became ingrained in her persona. She could hide the consequences in front of a camera, but those close to her began to notice the changes. dramatic mood swings, sleepless nights, and emotional outbursts. What remained of her former success was merely a shell. Online, she still appeared confident and carefree, but offline, she was losing touch with herself and with the world she once believed she controlled. In mid-2020, Anna returned from Russia to Moldova. Praskovia hoped that being back home would help her daughter recover. They began living together again in Comrat, in the house that used to feel empty due to Praskovia's frequent business trips. At first, things seemed calm. Praskovia focused on rebuilding trust, avoided arguments, and continued paying for psychological sessions. Anna agreed to attend, but took none of it seriously. FDs. For her, these visits were just something to get through, not a genuine effort to change. It didn't take long for her mother to realize that the calm exterior masked irritation and aggression. Praskovia explained her daughter's behavior as stress, burnout, but the signs of dependency were becoming impossible to ignore. Late-night activity, constant phone calls to friends, emotional instability. On several occasions, she found pills and empty medication packaging in Anna's room, none of which had been prescribed. Then, in the fall of 2020, the first serious crisis hit. Anna was found unconscious in her room after what doctors later confirmed was an overdose. She was rushed to the hospital in critical condition, caused by the use of banned substances. That was the moment Praskovia realized she couldn't handle this alone anymore. After her daughter was discharged, she insisted on full-time supervision and suggested a stay at a rehabilitation center. Anna flatly refused. She told her mother it was a one-time mistake and swore it wouldn't happen again. In an effort to maintain some peace, Praskovia backed off, opting instead for home care and close medical monitoring. For a short while, it seemed like things were improving. Anna was spending more time at home, focusing on her studies, and appeared calmer. But that calm didn't last. Within weeks, the tension returned. Their relationship grew increasingly strained. Any mention of treatment would trigger explosive reactions from Anna. Praskovia tried a softer approach, but every conversation ended in conflict. The house, once a symbol of stability, turned into a battleground of silent hostility. By the end of the year, the atmosphere had become unbearable. Praskovia contacted doctors, researched clinics, and began preparing paperwork for involuntary treatment. It was a last resort. She had no other option. In the final weeks leading up to the tragedy, the tension inside the house had reached a breaking point. Two women under the same roof, living in what felt like two separate realities. A mother desperately trying to save her daughter, and a daughter unwilling, orunable, to admit she needed help. December 4, 2020. Praskovia had just returned from Germany, where she'd spent several days at a professional conference. Friends later said she looked tired but composed and planned to spend the weekend at home with her daughter. That evening, around 7:00 p.m., she arrived at the house she and Anna shared. The housekeeper wasn't there that night. Praskovia had made a firm decision. After repeated failed attempts to convince Anna to enter treatment willingly, she had gathered all the necessary paperwork and filled out the referral forms for a private clinic. At first, the conversation was calm. Praskovia explained why treatment was necessary, framing it as a chance for Anna to regain control of her life. Anna responded first with indifference, then with irritation. When her mother revealed that everything had already been arranged, that doctors were expecting them the next morning, the tension exploded into shouting. According to investigators, Anna accused her mother of controlling her, interfering, and trying to humiliate her. Praskovia tried to de-escalate the situation, but emotions had gone too far. Around 8:00 p.m., there was a sudden outburst of aggression. Anna went to the kitchen and grabbed a knife. She took a knife and stabbed her mother in the chest multiple times. While Praskovia was left bleeding on the floor, Anna is said to have cut out her still beating heart. What followed happened in a matter of minutes. Afterward, Anna went to the bathroom. She carefully cleaned herself, changed clothes, and left the house. Investigation documents noted that she showed no visible signs of panic and kept her phone, personal documents with her. Anna went to her boyfriend's nearby apartment. According to him, she walked in calmly and said, "It's over. She's not in the way anymore." At first, he thought it was just a dramatic way of describing a fight. But as Anna shared more details, laughing almost jokingly, he began to realize it might be more serious. When he asked her directly if she was telling the truth, she just shrugged and laughed. Late that night, they left his apartment, bought champagne, and went out to a restaurant. Witnesses said Anna showed no signs of stress. She looked relaxed, even carefree. After dinner, she stayed the night at his place. The next morning, while Anna was still asleep, her boyfriend decided to check for himself. He went to the Lajkovic home. The front door was unlocked, and the house was silent. Inside the house, he was horrified to discover Praskovia's body. Immediately, he called emergency services. Law enforcement arrived shortly after. Officers documented the scene and quickly identified Anna as a person of interest. Neighbors reported hearing, shouting the night before, but said they hadn't intervened, assuming it was a typical family argument. After receiving a report from Anna's boyfriend, a search for the suspect was launched. Authorities eventually located her at a friend's home in a nearby district. During the arrest, she didn't resist. She was calm and detached. After her arrest, Anna was taken to the Comrat Police Department holding facility. Detectives pieced together a clear timeline of her actions after the incident and determined that she had composure, showing no visible panic. During her first interrogation, Anna denied any wrongdoing and appeared confident. Her answers were brief, often accompanied by a faint smile. One investigator later said it seemed as if she didn't take any of it seriously. That impression would later be confirmed by a psychological evaluation. Experts observed a lack of emotional response to the gravity of the situation, something that diverged sharply from what would be expected in a high-stress event. The assessment described Anna as having strong narcissistic tendencies, a pattern of manipulative behavior, and a flair for the dramatic. She showed no signs of remorse or guilt. Meanwhile, witness statements were being gathered. Neighbors reported hearing shouting on the night of December 4000, Idov, but didn't intervene, thinking it was just another argument. Friends, acquaintances confirmed that tensions between Anna and her mother had escalated in recent months, mostly over the subject of treatment. One university lecturer shared that, shortly before returning to Moldova, Anna had seemed unstable and often spoke about feeling pressured by her family. Anna's father, Vasily Aladov, did not speak publicly. However, relatives from his side of the family claimed they did not believe she was responsible, suggesting that she may have experienced a psychological breakdown. The story of a medical student accused of committing a crime against her physician mother spread rapidly through regional and international news. Final hearings were held in Chisinau in December 2021. By then, the investigation had lasted nearly a year. Dozens of interviews had been conducted, independent evaluations ordered, and psychiatric records reviewed. The trial itself was closed to the public, but the main findings were later confirmed by official sources. According to a psychiatric evaluation, at the time of the incident, Anna was in a psychological state that prevented her from fully understanding the nature and consequences of her actions. The assessment revealed signs of a severe mental disorder, exacerbated by psychoactive substances and emotional instability. The prosecution pushed for the maximum sentence, insisting Anna was fully responsible for her actions. They pointed to the sequence of events following the crime: cleaning herself, changing clothes, and attempting to flee, as evidence of intent and awareness. However, the defense submitted additional medical reports and expert testimony, all reinforcing the argument that Anna had lost control of her behavior. After reviewing both sides, the court accepted the findings of the psychiatric experts. Anna Lajkovic was ruled not criminally responsible and was ordered to undergo compulsory treatment at a high-security psychiatric facility. The sentence was open-ended. Her release would only be possible if a medical board determined she had shown consistent, verifiable improvement. Public reaction to the verdict was deeply divided. Some in Gagosiu and Chisinau considered it a just outcome, while others saw it as preferential treatment, possibly influenced by family connections. Journalists noted that in Moldova, where life sentences for women are not legally permitted, this verdict amounted to indefinite institutionalization. After the court's decision was announced, prosecutors filed an appeal, but the ruling was upheld. Anna's father declined to speak publicly. Her maternal relatives expressed hope that she would receive the care she needed and never return to her former life. On the night of February 1, 1986, two young women, Jennifer Dewey and Michelle Xavier, disappeared while driving home from Fremont, California. They had been best friends since high school, growing up together, working together, and sharing every moment of their 20s. Just hours after leaving a party, they were found dead, naked, on the side of a remote Mill Creek road. Their bodies were cold, their clothes were torn, and a pink jacket was the only significant clue left at the scene. The deaths of the two women shocked the Fremont community. In a place that had been peaceful, where violence had previously seemed like a regular on the evening news. Family, friends, and the entire city were in shock as two well-liked people became victims of a brutal crime. More than 3 decades later, the case went cold, until a DNA test revealed a name, David Misch, a serial killer who terrorized California in the 1,980 seconds. What police discovered next not only rekindled a forgotten double murder case, but also opened up a chain of chilling truths about a predator who had been hiding in plain sight for years. Jennifer Dewey and Michelle Xavier met in high school and quickly became best friends. They graduated in 1984 and enrolled in the same college. Although a year apart in age, they were inseparable. During college, they both lived with their parents, had boyfriends, and met regularly. Even though they have boyfriends, these two friends still spend most of their free time together. Jennifer was born on December 30, 1965, and was one of 6 children. By age 20, she worked in the cosmetics department of a store in Fremont, California, a city of about 200,000 people. Her best friend, Michelle Xavier, was born on June 14, 1966, and had only one younger brother. When she was 19, Michelle worked at a department store. In charge of the children's clothing section, people often remarked on how alike they looked, frequently mistaking them for sisters. On Saturday, February 1, 1986, Jennifer and Michelle went to a party with their boyfriends in a nearby suburb. Bored, the girls left around 8 p.m. to head back to Fremont. While their boyfriends stayed behind, they planned to drive about 20 minutes and continue their evening in the city rather than go straight home. They stopped at a friend's house, ordered pizza, watched a movie, and hung out. Later, driving Jennifer's convertible, they spotted their boyfriends in a supermarket parking lot. They pulled in, chatted for a while, and then parted ways. Jennifer mentioned she wanted to grab pizza before going home. She and Michelle left the parking lot at about 2:23 a.m. That was the last time they were seen alive, around 12:30 a.m. On Sunday, February 2, a man riding a motorbike on a narrow road called Mill Creek in the suburbs spotted a suspicious object. When he returned to check, he discovered the nude bodies of 2 young women. Terrified, he called the police. The only clothing found nearby was a pink coat, When the police arrived, they found that the killer had made no attempt to hide the body and likely killed them on the spot, then left, initially without any identifying information. The body was taken for identification and autopsy. Forensics and investigators combed the remote road for evidence. That night, Jennifer's mother had expected her home by midnight. She left the porch light on and went to bed, assuming late nights were not unusual for her adult daughter. By 9 o'clock she realized Jennifer still hadn't returned. Thinking Jennifer might have spent the night with Michelle, she called Michelle's home, only to learn Michelle hadn't come home either. Both families initially assumed the girls were with their boyfriends. The parents remained relatively calm until 1 o'clock p.m. when Jennifer's employer called to ask why she'd missed her shift, something she had never done. Alarmed, Jennifer's mother contacted Michelle's family again. They, too, had received calls about Michelle missing work. Together, the families filed missing persons reports. Police, aware of the two unidentified bodies, I suspected a connection. Their suspicions grew when Jennifer's parents said she'd been wearing a pink coat, matching the one found at the scene. Later that day, February 2, officers located Jennifer's convertible parked behind a gas station near the shopping center where she worked. The car had no keys or personal items that could help identify the victims, but the license plate confirmed it was Jennifer's vehicle. Police contacted the mall staff, the nearby hotel owner, and the gas station owner to gather information. The gas station owner said a car suddenly appeared behind the building at 11:15 p.m. Two women got out and lingered near it, but he didn't see them leave. Later, an employee said that at 11:20 p.m., when he went out to smoke, he did not see any cars near the gas station. He also personally knew both Jennifer and Michelle. Witnesses suggested the abduction took no more than 5 minutes. There was a bar nearby, but Jennifer and Michelle, being under 21, could not have gone inside. Nevertheless, the kidnapper may have appeared at the bar, so the staff and the owner were also questioned, but no one noticed anything unusual. On February 5, 1986, a memorial service was held for Jennifer and Michelle, who seemed inseparable in life and died together. More than 1,000 people attended. They were buried on February 6. That same day, a vote approved a $5,000 reward for information leading to the arrest of whoever was responsible for Jennifer and Michelle's deaths. Beginning February 7, more details about the attack were released. Previously, police had revealed almost nothing. Authorities then disclosed that one victim had been fatally slashed with a bladed weapon and the other had been shot. On February 13, a photo was released, taken just hours before the murder, showing Jennifer and Michelle together for the last time. Public interest remained high. After the release of information and photographs, about 100 people came forward, but unfortunately all provided false or worthless leads. By then, the city council had increased the reward to $6,000. In March, Michelle's cousin organized a fundraiser to expand the reward, including a benefit concert. By April, the fund had reached $35,000. A bulletin with pictures of Jennifer and Michelle was released, compiling all the official information released by the authorities. Meanwhile, detectives were still actively investigating and noted several similar cases in the area in 1983 to 1984, but found no direct connection with the deaths of two young girls, Jennifer and Michelle. Many people suspect this is a serial killer. Those fears grew when another victim, 20 years old Dana Lee, was found in early March 1987. She had last been seen on December 29, 1986, at a gas station near where Jennifer's car had been found. Investigators eventually caught Dana's killer, but could not connect him to the double murder of Michelle and Jennifer. Leads dried up, and suspects with solid alibis were eliminated. The case stalled. For years, no new information emerged. Similar cases had occurred in the area before the 1,990 seconds, But after investigation, no connection to Jennifer and Michelle's case could be found. However, police periodically reviewed and re-examined the case. New forensic techniques brought renewed hope. In 2001, investigators found skin cells under Jennifer's fingernails. They developed a DNA profile of the attacker and uploaded it to a law enforcement database. But it produced no matches. In 2016, the Fremont Police Department created a cold case unit that reopened Jennifer and Michelle's case. Detectives retested old DNA evidence using updated databases and found a match to David Misch, whose DNA had been uploaded in 2003. DNA from under a victim's fingernails matched David's DNA. That evidence was collected in 2001, 2 years before his profile entered the database. David had been convicted of murder in 1989 and was serving a life sentence in the early 2000s. Notably, when his DNA was first compared to evidence from Jennifer and Michelle's case in 2003, it already showed a match. Detectives interviewed David. He said he tried to help Jennifer and Michelle. He said he was at a gas station when he saw 2 men dragging Jennifer behind a building. He rushed over, realized there were 2 victims, and tried to intervene. According to him, the men forced both girls into a car and fled. He said he was hit in the face and disoriented, and Jennifer may have scratched him while trying to escape, which could explain the DNA under her fingernails. A week later, detectives asked David to tell the story again. David refused, so the account was never publicly released. However, the interview is still important because he admits to being with Jennifer and Michelle during their kidnapping. He was not questioned again for 14 years. In August 2017, the case unit found a DNA match for David in the database. They also interviewed Jennifer and Michelle's family again. On September 8, 2017, they met with David, who repeated his 2003 story. On March 2, 2018, prosecutors charged David with 2 counts of first-degree murder and kidnapping. He remained in county custody. The case subsequently faced numerous delays, prison transfers, administrative issues, and additional charges, including the 1988 kidnapping. As a result, David did not appear in court until October 21, 2024. The trial lasted 6 weeks and revealed disturbing details previously kept from the public. Prosecutors stated that Michelle was attacked with a knife and died from a deep throat wound that caused her to bleed out within minutes. Jennifer was shot 3 times in the back, suggesting she tried to flee. Letters and numbers found on Michelle's palm were identified as a license plate. A reinvestigation showed it matched a motorcycle registered to David Misch in the 1,980 seconds. Detectives in the original investigation did not recognize the markings and likely searched for a car owner instead of a motorcyclist. Blood was found in Michelle's convertible. Many previously undisclosed details related to Jennifer and Michelle's clothes and belongings. They were not lost, but were found near the bodies. T-shirts, sweatshirts, pants, and underwear were scattered, some hanging from tree branches and from barbed wire along the roadside fence. The bodies were originally discovered by a county judge and his wife as they drove by. The judge has since passed away, but his 90-year-old wife testified at the trial, describing a horrific scene with blood and torn clothing everywhere, as if something brutal had taken place. David Misch testified in his own defense, despite his lawyer's warnings. He then changed his story dramatically. He claimed that he was a banned substance dealer and said that Jennifer and Michelle approached him on the night of the kidnapping. He first met Jennifer at a shopping mall shortly before the murder and gave her a number to buy a banned substance. According to him, she repeatedly called to purchase marijuana for herself, her friend, and her boyfriend. David said they later met at a gas station at night, talked for a few minutes, and shared a cigarette. He argued that this is how his DNA ended up under Jennifer's fingernails. After selling the banned substance, he said that he drove away and didn't know what happened next. This major shift in his account only deepens suspicion He showed no remorse and even hummed a tune in court. On December 19, 2024, David refused to attend the sentencing hearing. He was convicted and faces life imprisonment. The maximum sentence is expected to be handed down on January 21, 2025. However, the case does not end there. Advances in forensic analysis link David to several other violent crimes previously left unsolved. At 3:00 p.m. on December 7, 1989, Margaret Ball, 36, was found dead on the living room floor. She lived with her 11-year-old daughter, who discovered her mother's death. Margaret had been severely beaten and stabbed multiple times in the chest and abdomen. David was her neighbor. They had been on friendly terms, and he sometimes ran errands for her for money. Over time, he developed a romantic interest, which he rejected. After she refused, he became aggressive and threatening, and she began avoiding him. After the murder, Margaret's 1981 Mazda, along with her wallet, food stamps, and $85, were missing. A crucial clue. The next morning, police arrested David after spotting him driving a car with Margaret's license plate. His father testified that on the day Margaret was found dead, he came home and confessed, saying that he had attacked her while under the influence of a banned substance, robbed her, and stolen her car. At the trial, David stated that initially Margaret agreed to be intimate with him, but later changed her mind, which led him to hit her. He said she pulled a knife. A struggle ensued, and he stabbed her in a rage. The trial ended in 1990, and David was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. But that was only part of his string of crimes. While the Jennifer and Michelle cases were still pending, another complaint arose. David was suspected of being involved in the kidnapping of 9-year-old Michaela Garricht, a case that had made headlines. Her disappearance drew national attention, with extensive media coverage. In September 2020, athlete Joe Montana publicly suggested David Misch might also have been involved in the murder of his wife, who was found dead in their Malibu home. An event also dated to 1988, 3 months after Michaela's abduction. On December 21, 2020, David was indicted for kidnapping Michaela after investigators found partial fingerprints on the scooter Michaela was riding. He is believed to have lived nearby at the time, and evidence matched his fingerprints. Michaela Garricht was born on January 24, 1979, the middle of 3 children. Her family moved to Hayward in 1987. Soon after, Michaela knocked on a neighbor's door, hoping to make a new friend. That's how she met Katrina. They became best friends, even dressing alike and pretending to be twins. Their story parallels that of Jennifer and Michelle, who were also close friends and later became victims of David. On November 19, 1988, Michaela spent the day with Katrina. They went to a store to buy candy and soda. Riding there on a scooter, Michaela had borrowed from her brother. After shopping, they started home. After a few hundred meters, they remembered that they had left their scooter in the parking lot. So they turned back. It wasn't where they had left it. After looking around, they found it lying on the ground in a more secluded part of the lot. As Michaela bent down to pick it up, a man who appeared to be homeless suddenly grabbed her. Katrina described him as unkempt and dirty, fair-skinned, with long, untrimmed hair. She saw him drag Michaela into a car and drive away. She ran into the store for help, and an employee called the police. The only immediate lead was her description of the abductor. Katrina provided information and led police to the tire tracks where the car had been parked. She described the car but couldn't see the license plate, limiting the usefulness of the tip. The family mobilized immediately. In the first week alone, about 40,000 flyers were distributed. Despite this, the case went cold for years. Police received no solid leads. Even after press conferences, Hayward officers interviewed numerous men with histories of kidnappings and violent offenses, but none confessed. Several suspects were identified, Yet investigations showed they could not have committed the crime. For decades, Michaela's family hoped she was alive. Though the odds were slim, they resisted believing the worst. When Michaela's mother was told a primary suspect had been identified, she declined to meet him. She thanked the investigators and said she had long accepted her daughter's death, only hoping to know where she was. Tragically, Michaela's mother died in 2022 without that answer. At the time, David was still awaiting trial for Michaela's kidnapping. David's criminal history began at age 16. In 1977, he broke into a neighbor's house and attacked the housekeeper, threatening her with a knife and attempting to strangle her. She managed to fight him off and escape. He was arrested, adjudicated as a juvenile, served a short sentence, and was released on parole. In 1979, he broke into another neighbor's home and threatened a mother and her 2 children. She talked him down, and he left without harming them. After his arrest, he was committed to a psychiatric hospital. In September 1981, he was released after experts deemed him no longer a threat. The assessment proved wrong. In June 1982, he attacked and beat an exchange student. While the girl was unconscious, he tried to drag her into the car, but a passerby intervened and he fled. Thanks to the witness's account, David was arrested and convicted. He was sentenced to 4 years in prison. By late 1985, he was released. He got a job and appeared to be attempting a normal life. He started a relationship, and his girlfriend became pregnant. On February 1, 1986, he murdered Jennifer and Michelle. In November 1987, his girlfriend gave birth, but the baby died at 3 months old. The death was ruled natural causes. In February 1988, David was imprisoned for theft and released a few months later. In November 1988, he kidnapped Michaela. In April 1989, he was again incarcerated for theft. On December 7, 1989, he murdered Margaret Ball. Michaela Garrick's kidnapping trial began in January 2023. Her friend Katrina testified as a witness. As soon as Katrina saw David, the man who kidnapped her best friend Michaela, she immediately recognized him and has been tormented by self-blame ever since. For 10 years after Michaela's disappearance, Katrina continued to buy her birthday presents. David's lawyer argued there was no proof Michaela had died and suggested she might have run away. However, given Katrina's eyewitness account of the abduction, the runaway theory was not considered credible. David has never admitted guilt, shown remorse, or provided any details about what happened to Michaela. The trial remains ongoing, and Michaela's body has not been found. In Anchorage, Alaska, on the night of January 6, 1978, a 16-year-old girl left home and told her mother she was going ice skating with friends. That was just an innocent lie of youth, and also the last words her family ever heard. Her name was Shelley Connolly, a young woman who dreamed of becoming a cosmetologist with a bright future ahead of her. But just hours later, that life was cut short by a brutal act of violence. The next morning, Shelley's body was found at Beluga Point, thrown down a frigid cliff. Her clothes were torn, her body covered in bruises. She had crawled back up the cliff, fighting to stay alive, and then collapsed silently into the icy cold. The haunting question is, who dragged an innocent young woman into that deadly night? Who beat Mediasal, tortured, and abandoned her in the Alaskan darkness? And why did justice go unpunished for more than 4 decades? Until a new genetic technique gave the Connolly family hope. In 1978, 16 years old, Shelley Connolly lived in Anchorage. Alaska. She lived a typical teenage life, going to school, meeting friends, attending parties. Besides, she pursued her dream of becoming a cosmetologist. She knew she needed a degree, so she planned to finish high school and then attend medical school. To stay independent and fund her goals, she studied hard and worked part-time. She also loved hairstyling and had completed a hairdressing course, which brought in extra income. January 6, 1978, began like any other day. Shelley went to school in the morning and, after returning home, told her mother she was going ice skating with friends. That was a lie. Instead, that evening she went to a bustling bar in Anchorage, popular with locals and visitors. Although the security guard was not allowed to let anyone under the age of 16 in, Shelley was a regular and was allowed in. Many other teenagers also frequented the bar in the late 1970 seconds. Shelley's older sister was also at the bar with her boyfriend and saw Shelley that night. At the bar, Shelley met a group of 3 young men who looked strange and did not seem to be local. They stayed late, leaving around 2:00 a.m. A security guard, as well as Shelley's sister and her boyfriend, saw the group get into a small dark sedan. Shelley's sister tried to stop her from going with those men, but she refused. When the sister returned home later, Shelley wasn't home. She chose not to worry immediately, assuming Shelley would come back soon, and went to bed. By morning, their parents were already trying to locate her. They called friends and acquaintances, but no one had seen Shelley since the previous night. By midday, the family reported her missing to the police. The older sister told officers Shelley had been at the bar and described the 3 men who she suspected were oil pipeline workers and not locals. Police began searching for suspicious young men among shift workers and recent arrivals. They also looked into men recently released from prison who had returned to Anchorage. Neither lead produced results. Because a minor had disappeared under troubling circumstances, police moved quickly, canvassing the area and interviewing bar staff. After a day, the investigation had stalled. They had only descriptions of the men and no solid leads. The next morning, tourists stopped near the railroad tracks at Beluga Point to take photos. From the edge of a rocky ledge, one of them spotted what looked like a human body down a steep slope. They called authorities immediately. Police arrived and found a girl's body about 15 meters down the rocks. Her sleeveless blouse was pushed up to her neck, and her body was covered in abrasions and bruises. She looked very young, likely a minor, and had no identification on her. Evidence suggested she had been violently assaulted over a period of time. Investigators believed she was beaten, dragged along asphalt behind a vehicle, and then thrown down the embankment, likely while the car was still moving, as there were no tire marks indicating braking. The location where she had been dumped was identified, based on the position of the victim's body on the slope. It can be seen that she continued to fight for her life after falling down there. She was still alive and conscious, as shown by marks in the rocks. She had tried to crawl upward, but her legs were broken from the fall from the car. The prolonged beating left her so exhausted she couldn't stand. The initial autopsy revealed that the injuries were not immediately fatal. However, it was January in Alaska, and the weather was extremely cold. The victim was wearing only a thin, sleeveless blouse and jeans, so it was possible that she died from hypothermia. A definitive conclusion was reached only after the autopsy was completed. The lab later determined that the brutality of the attack was more severe than initially thought. The victim suffered severe injuries that led to life-threatening internal bleeding. In addition to the injuries, the victim also engaged in intimate behavior immediately before death, possibly voluntary. She had been beaten with a blunt object, resulting in multiple lacerations, severe abrasions, and bruises. She suffered a ruptured liver from blunt force trauma to the abdomen. The autopsy listed the cause of death as internal bleeding and hypothermia. Defensive wounds and skin particles under her fingernails indicated a prolonged struggle. The assailant likely sustained injuries. Police began searching for a violent man with injuries to his hands and face. In addition to the suspect's DNA, bodily fluids were collected from under the victim's fingernails, showing signs of abuse. This evidence would have been valuable, but in 1978, DNA analysis and profiling techniques were not yet developed. Fortunately, the medical examiner preserved and archived the samples. The immediate priority was to identify the victim. Anchorage police held a press conference and, along with local television, announced the discovery of a young girl who had been abused and murdered. The brutality of the crime, possibly involving torture, sparked public outrage. Migrant workers were again blamed by some for rising crime. Shelley's family did not see the announcement immediately, but later heard that an unidentified victim had been found a few miles from Anchorage. Her parents contacted authorities and, based on the clothing description, suspected it was Shelley. Family members then confirmed the victim was 16-year-old Shelley Connolly. A homicide investigation began. Notably, this occurred while a serial killer, later identified as Robert Hansen, was targeting women in and around Anchorage. 7 more bodies were found that same year. Initially, police suspected Shelley was a victim of serial killer Robert Hansen. However, detectives quickly realized that the circumstances of Shelley's death did not match his pattern or victim profile. When Robert was eventually caught, his DNA and even his blood type did not match the evidence in Shelley's case. With numerous assaults and murders in the area, Anchorage police were overwhelmed and lacked resources, so Shelley's case received limited attention. Detectives found no solid leads. The weapons used to restrain and beat her were never recovered, leaving no fingerprints. Witnesses couldn't reliably describe everyone who had been with Shelley during her final hours. Many bar patrons were heavily intoxicated, and their accounts conflicted, weakening their credibility. Even so, the investigation continued. After interviewing witnesses and reviewing the bar's usual patrons, one name kept coming up. A man known in the criminal underworld as Pinky. He lived near Anchorage, and multiple witnesses identified him. A background check showed he'd been on law enforcement's radar since his teens. With a growing list of offenses, his crimes escalated over time. By the period near Shelley's death, he had committed several violent assaults and was distributing banned substances. Detectives couldn't immediately name a prime suspect. Pinky seemed to vanish, which only heightened suspicion. Reports suggest that Pinky went into hiding after the abuse and murder. However, the case did not become a national manhunt because the police found him within 48 hours. He was taken to the police station for questioning, denied all charges, and provided an alibi, which was later proven true. Police then appealed to the public again, sharing all available details and asking witnesses to come forward. Several did. Despite the new tips, none led anywhere. The case stalled. Between 1978 and 1997, detectives made multiple attempts to solve Shelley Connolly's murder. They identified various suspects, but each denied guilt and produced alibis. There wasn't enough evidence to file charges. Suspect lists grew, but new arrests followed. Lacking convincing evidence, the investigation needed a new direction. By 1997, they re-examined the case with fresh eyes. At that time, DNA testing made major strides, and a specialized profiling lab opened in Alaska. Evidence from the Shelley Connolly case was sent for analysis, and a DNA profile of the perpetrator was developed. Her family hoped they would finally learn who killed their daughter. The profile was checked against the criminal database, but no match appeared. Unsurprising, since the database was still in its early stages and samples were limited. Despite repeated re-examinations, no match was found. In 2003, there was renewed hope with the full rollout of the CODIS combined DNA system. Investigators expected a breakthrough, but again, no matches. Detectives asked, could someone who could commit such a brutal crime not commit similar crimes for decades? Over the next 15 years, Shelley's case was re-examined several times, each ending in a dead end. It wasn't until 2018, when a new cold case team was formed, that the investigation took a turn. A young, promising investigator noticed an innovative method he'd heard about in a report: forensic genetic genealogy. The method, highlighted by breakthroughs from Parabon, had already helped solve dozens of long cold cases. The investigator proposed sending the unknown offender's DNA from the Shelley Connolly case to a lab. Using this approach, although the method was not widely known and skepticism remained after nearly 40 years of failure, Anchorage police leadership approved the plan. While a complete DNA profile couldn't be built from scratch, the lab obtained enough genetic information to find a close match. They identified a partial match to a woman in Florida, likely the suspect's cousin or second cousin. When contacted, she agreed to provide a DNA sample for more precise analysis. The match was confirmed, and a genealogist began building the suspect's family tree. This work traced the lineage back to a shared ancestor, a great-great-grandfather born in Pennsylvania. Identifying this common ancestor was a major breakthrough. The man in question was John McQuaid. John had 9 children, 6 daughters and 3 sons. Investigators focused on the sons, who were in their 22nd and 32nd at the time of Shelley's murder. The McQuaid brothers were known to be close but quarrelsome. They drank heavily, spent most of their free time together, and often went to bars. Since they were siblings, any of them could have been the owners of the skin and body fluids collected from Shelley's body. Detectives wanted to interview each brother individually. Tracking them down was difficult, as they had moved multiple times since the late 1972, separated, and later reunited. As the search continued, investigators dug into the McQuaid family's history. They learned that the middle brother, Donald, had moved from the settlement to Anchorage with his mother in 1971. He dropped out of school and worked as a laborer, taking whatever odd jobs he could find. Without an education, his options were limited. Over time, he slipped into crime, primarily focusing on distributing illegal goods. From a young age, he had several encounters with the law. What began as a long stretch of rebellion ended with convictions for burglary and carrying a weapon, sending him to prison. By 1978, Donald was out on parole and still on probation. About 6 months before Shelley was attacked, he shared a rented apartment in Anchorage with friends, and witnesses said he was trying to turn his life around. In prison, Donald earned his diploma and began planning for a better future. Education, a steady career, and a family. He claimed he wanted to leave crime behind. Notably, a few weeks after Shelley's murder, he reported to his parole officer, as required, and asked for permission to move to another city. Today, that request might look like an attempt to distance himself from the crime scene. In 1978, however, it raised no alarm. He was approved to relocate and left without issue. Later, when Anchorage police obtained a photo of the prime suspect from the late 1972, detectives immediately noticed he resembled one of the men seen with Shelley on the night she died. That link had been missed during the original investigation. The more detectives learned about Donald, the more suspicious he seemed. Still, only DNA could confirm or rule him out. Investigators needed a sample, and the trail led them to a suburb of Portland, Oregon, where the McQuaid brothers were living. Donald is confirmed to be living with his brother Richard. Anchorage investigators asked Portland police to collect DNA from both men. Richard remained a person of interest, though Donald was the more likely match. The third brother was quickly eliminated. He was in prison when Shelley was attacked. Police aimed to obtain DNA from one or both of the remaining brothers. Local officers found Donald easily. Within an hour of surveillance, they saw him smoke a cigarette and toss it outside. They retrieved it and sent it for testing. The results showed that the DNA matched 100%, with the DNA found under Shelley's fingernails, definitively identifying the culprit. On August 29, 2019, a cold case investigator contacted Donald in Oregon. The first question concerns the death of a young woman. Donald denied knowing her and said he didn't understand who they meant. When he realized they were asking about a deceased teenager named Shelley Connolly, he continued to insist he had never met her and knew nothing about her death. By then, detectives already knew that after the murder and his relocation, Donald had lived with a roommate in a city dormitory. Investigators contacted a neighbor to learn more about Donald's life during that period. The neighbor described him as withdrawn and uncommunicative, prone to losing control when drinking and behaving foolishly while intoxicated. The neighbor never heard Donald confess to the murder, but investigators believe they still have enough evidence to charge him. On August 30, 2019, Oregon police arrested Donald, the prime suspect. They relied on witness statements, including several men who identified Donald as the person who left the bar with Shelley the night she died. Police then contacted Shelley's mother, Judy. For 41 years, Judy regularly visited the Anchorage police station, hoping to hear that the killer had been caught. By 2019, she had nearly lost hope. When told that Donald had been arrested, she was skeptical, assuming he was just another unlikely suspect. However, once she learned how strong the evidence was, she felt relief mixed with grief. She wanted justice for her daughter. The investigation wasn't finished. During interrogation, Donald changed his story as soon as he was confronted with the evidence. Now, he claims that he may have been intimate with Shelley in 1978. He said he often got drunk in bars and met random women. Shelley could have been one of them. It was possible, he said, that they had a brief encounter and parted ways, and he simply didn't remember. He continued to deny involvement in the murder, saying he might have forgotten the encounter because he couldn't remember all the women he met during that period. Donald's brother, Richard, spoke to police and said he did not believe Donald could have killed Shelley. Although Donald had some run-ins with the law when he was younger, Richard said he had never seen him act cruelly toward women. He acknowledged, however, that Donald had problems with alcohol and behavior. While investigators continue to speak with Donald's family, he has been extradited to Alaska and is being held in the Anchorage jail. He was granted the option of a $1 million bail, with the additional requirement that a third-party custodian supervise him if he posted bond before trial. The family couldn't afford the bail, so Donald remained in custody. Bureaucratic complications followed. The defense asked the court to lower his bail and allow him to return to Oregon. With weekly telephone check-ins, Shelley's mother said the request was unreasonable, given the seriousness of the charges, and believed Donald deserved to be imprisoned. The bail amount was not eliminated. After reviewing the requests, the judge concluded that Donald did not pose a danger to the Oregon community due to his health, but remained a significant flight risk. The defense's proposed $2,500 bail was deemed too low. The judge set it at $10,000 instead. Additionally, Donald had to waive extradition, buy his own round-trip plane ticket to Oregon, and wear an ankle monitor until the hearing. During the trial, which lasted only 2 weeks, the prosecution convincingly proved Donald's guilt. He was found guilty of the first-degree murder of Shelley Connolly. The defense asked for a 20-year sentence, while the prosecutor pushed for the maximum allowed under 1,970 law. In the end, 60 years old Donald McQuaid received a 50-year sentence, effectively a life term given his age and health. The verdict brought comfort to Shelley's loved ones, although her mother died before the verdict. Still, many questions remain. What was the motive? Donald probably didn't even know Shelley. Investigators also never identified 2 other men who were with her at the bar that evening and left with her. In every peaceful town, behind every perfect family portrait, there can be a story no one dares to imagine. It was one of those quiet Italian communities where the days felt predictable, the streets felt safe, and the Del Grande family appeared to be everything a household should be. Hardworking, respected, united. But behind the walls of their elegant home, something far more sinister had been growing for years. An emotional storm centered around one troubled son. And on a cold January night in 1998, that storm finally erupted, leaving a trail of devastation that shook Italy to its core. This is the story of Elia Del Grande, the man who would turn his family home into a massacre scene. Elia Del Grande was raised in a hard-working family. His father, Andrea Del Grande, had always been ambitious, studious, determined, and committed to building something of his own. Through years of dedication, he managed to open and grow a family bakery business that became well known in the area. Shortly after completing his studies, Andrea met Alida, a driven young woman, 5 years his junior. They quickly began a relationship, married soon after, and welcomed their first son, Enrico. 5 years later, their second child, Elia, was born. They did not plan to have more children. They wanted to focus on expanding their business and raising their 2 sons, future heirs to the family enterprise. Enrico grew up intelligent, quiet, and diligent. Elia, on the other hand, was his complete opposite. From early childhood, Elia was energetic, impulsive, and increasingly difficult to control. Even Andrea struggled with his temper. When Elia began attending school, his behavior only worsened. He frequently clashed with classmates, leading the family to consider placing him in a special program for troubled youth. In the end, they decided instead to have him live temporarily with his grandmother and aunt. For 3 years, Elia stayed with his relatives. When he returned home, his parents hoped that the change of environment had made a difference. At first, he seemed calmer, but soon the disruptive behavior resumed. When Elia graduated from school, the family hoped maturity would help him settle down. His parents did everything they could to support him, but their efforts failed. Elia had fallen into alcohol and banned substances use as a teenager, and after graduation, his addictions deepened. The Del Grande family lived together in a large home in Cadrazate, a peaceful town in northern Italy. Locals respected Andrea, Alida, and Enrico for their kindness and work ethic. Elia, however, became famous for all the wrong reasons. By the mid-1990s, his behavior became increasingly dangerous. The turning point came when Elia attacked a taxi driver with a knife, inflicting serious injuries that cost the man an eye. Even then, his parents continued to support him. Yet they also recognized that drastic measures were needed. Because the family owned a property in Santo Domingo, the capital of the Dominican Republic, they decided to send Elia there in hopes that distance and structure would help him turn his life around. At first, the plan seemed promising. Elia found work at a family-run club in Santo Domingo, part of their broader business interests. But soon Andrea and Alida learned that he had begun a relationship with a local woman, someone they believed had the same emotional instability and personal struggles as their son. The entire family opposed the relationship, fearing it would push him further off track. But Elia was stubborn. He insisted on marrying the woman, defying all objections. Every argument with his family ended with him threatening to run away permanently to start a new life with her. Tensions between Elia and his parents grew worse. Their disagreements became constant, and the household atmosphere deteriorated rapidly. Then came January 7, 1998. Its emergency operators received a chilling call that evening. A young man, barely able to speak and gasping for air, reported that someone had broken into the Del Grande home and shot the entire family. Before he could identify himself, the call abruptly ended. The dispatcher, alarmed and confused, immediately alerted the nearest patrol officer several kilometers from the villa. The Del Grande family was well known in the community. He was shocked that a shooting could have occurred in such a quiet, safe neighborhood. But instead of making quick assumptions, he approached cautiously, determined to understand what had really happened. When he reached the villa, everything looked eerily still. The house was dark, silent, no movement visible through the windows. Shortly after the patrol officer arrived, an ambulance pulled up to the address. The officer knocked repeatedly and rang the doorbell, but no one responded. He tried calling back the young man who had placed the emergency call, but the first attempt went unanswered. He dialed several more times. On the final call, someone picked up, yet no words followed. All he could hear was strained, panicked breathing. As if the caller was unable to speak, the situation clearly appeared dire. The officer decided he could not wait any longer. He forced open the door and stepped inside the house. Unsure whether the shooter was still present, he called for backup and moved cautiously forward with his weapon drawn. A quick sweep of the ground floor revealed nothing. So he proceeded upstairs. There, lying in a pool of blood near a telephone, he found a young man, 27-year-old Enrico Del Grande. Though gravely wounded, he was still alive. Emergency responders provided first aid and rushed him to the hospital. But he died shortly afterward. As the officer continued examining the home, he noticed heavy bloodstains across the living room and hallway. Following the trail, he reached the master bedroom. Beside the bed lay 53-year-old Alida Del Grande, already deceased from a gunshot wound. The room bore clear signs of a struggle. Items scattered across the floor and overturned objects indicated she had fought desperately for her life. But to no avail. The search continued through the villa until the officer reached the garage. There, next to the family car, he found the body of 58-year-old Andrea Del Grande, the patriarch of the family. He had been shot multiple times in the back and head. He had died before help arrived. One person, however, was missing. The youngest son, Elia. Investigators searched the property, but he was nowhere to be found. Inside the house, they quickly noticed that one firearm from Enea's hunting rifle collection was missing. The caliber matched the bullets used in the killings. Shell casings were scattered near the victims, and an empty ammunition box was discovered in a closet. Yet far more rounds were missing than had been fired. Whoever committed the murders had fled heavily armed. Local residents were warned immediately. At first, authorities feared that the killer might have taken Elia hostage. Early speculation suggested a burglary gone wrong, but that theory quickly collapsed. Aside from the missing rifle, nothing valuable had been taken. Jewelry, electronics, cash, all untouched. There were no signs of forced entry on any door or window. These facts pointed to one conclusion: this was not a robbery. It was personal. And driven by hatred, the search for 22-year-old Elia Del Grande escalated rapidly. Within hours, the scenario shifted from a potential kidnapping to a manhunt for the primary and only suspect. Carabinieri investigators began gathering background information on the family, and the picture that emerged was troubling. These suspicions were reinforced when investigators confirmed Elia had a previous criminal record for a particularly brutal incident involving a taxi driver. When police interviewed the man who survived that attack, he recounted the event with visible emotion. It occurred shortly after Elia turned 17. The man, a local driver well known to the Del Grande family, had often driven Elia home after nights out. On that night, Elia had been agitated from the moment he got into the car. The driver, familiar with Elia's volatile temper, tried not to provoke him and remained silent. It made no difference. Without warning or apparent reason, Elia suddenly lunged at him, stabbing him repeatedly and inflicting injuries so severe that the driver lost an eye. The incident deeply alarmed investigators and raised serious concerns about Elia's mental stability. While searching his room, police uncovered a large collection of bladed weapons. Those who knew him described this fascination as an obsession. He owned nearly 100 knives of various shapes, sizes. Former classmates and teachers recalled him as impulsive, easily provoked, frequently involved in conflicts both inside and outside of school. He also gravitated toward extremist circles and was known to have associated with a group of local skinheads. Investigators soon discovered that the Del Grande family had tried everything to help him, yet nothing seemed to make a lasting difference. In an effort to pull their son out of his downward spiral, his parents eventually made a drastic decision. They sent Elia to Santo Domingo. The family owned several properties there, including a nightclub that was popular with locals. They believed that distancing him from the troubled friendships he had formed in Italy would give him a fresh start. At first, the change of scenery seemed promising. Elia found work at the family's nightclub, and for a brief period his parents hoped he might eventually take a stable role in the business. But those hopes quickly faded. The nightclub scene was no less problematic than the environment he had left behind. It attracted all kinds of questionable characters, and hard-banned substances were readily available. It was there. Investigators believe that Elia, who had previously used only softer substances, began experimenting with much more dangerous ones. Even worse, he soon became involved with a young Dominican woman who works as an escort, servicing truck drivers. Instead of keeping his distance, Elia became infatuated with her and immersed himself in a chaotic lifestyle. Elia began financially supporting the woman, hoping she might leave escort. He paid for everything: her food, rent, clothing, and mounting personal debts. Month after month, he poured more money into the relationship for Elia. His obsession with the young woman soon became as consuming as his fascination with weapons. Initially, he tried to hide the relationship from his family, but they quickly noticed that Elia's spending had spiraled out of control. He was wasting large sums not only on the woman but also on prohibited substances and other illegal activities. Concerned, his older brother Enrico traveled to Santo Domingo to confront him. When Enrico discovered the full extent of the situation, he immediately informed their parents. They insisted Elia return to Italy. But by then he refused to leave the Dominican Republic. Tensions within the family escalated. After Enrico's failed attempt to bring Elia home, Elia wrote an angry letter in which he openly expressed contempt for his parents and hinted that things would end badly if they continued interfering in his life. Still, the Del Grande family was determined. Shortly before Christmas 1997, they finally convinced Elia to return to Italy. But once he arrived back home, arguments resumed almost immediately, always revolving around the same topic: the woman from Santo Domingo. No one in the family wanted her entering their lives or their home. The hostility continued to grow, and Elia's resentment intensified. According to the reconstructed timeline, on the evening of January 6, 1998, Elia and his parents went to a local pizzeria for dinner. There, he once again brought up his desire to return to the Dominican Republic to marry the woman. He insisted he planned to wed her on January 10. To his parents, this sounded reckless and dangerous. Exhausted by his behavior, they struggled to stay calm. They had no intention of allowing their son to marry an escort. A heated argument erupted once more. Elia left abruptly and did not return home with his parents. Instead, he went to visit a friend, 33-year-old Pier Angelo, a stable hand from Vergiate and one of Elia's longtime acquaintances. This visit was no coincidence. Pier Angelo later told investigators that they spent most of the night drinking and talking. But this was not completely true. Elia had taken prohibited substances and left around 3 a.m. Agitated and fueled by anger, Pier admitted that Elia talked about wanting revenge that night. But he insisted he had not taken the threats seriously. In his words, Elia's dark, sarcastic humor often blurred the line between a joke and something far more sinister. Further investigation revealed that after returning home, Elia immediately seized one of his father's rifles. He loaded the weapon and headed straight to his parents' bedroom. He fired 2 shots at his mother and 2 more at his father. Though gravely wounded, his father managed to stagger toward the garage in a desperate attempt to escape. His mother tried to fight back, but she was overpowered almost instantly. Elia then moved to the living room, where his older brother, Enrico, was asleep. Enrico had already been jolted awake by the gunfire. He was shot twice as well. After he lost consciousness, Elia began staging the scene as a robbery. He scattered various objects throughout the house, took one of the family rifles along with ammunition, and fled the home. Despite his injuries, Enrico managed to call emergency services. In the hours that followed, Elia contacted several acquaintances and transferred yet another large sum of money to his girlfriend in the Dominican Republic. By dawn, he was already inside a taxi headed toward the Swiss border. His flight was short-lived, thanks to a rapid international alert. Swiss authorities stopped him at a border checkpoint. His strange demeanor raised immediate suspicion, and the guards detained him before notifying the Italian Carabinieri. Shortly thereafter, Elia was interrogated. He confessed to the triple homicide almost immediately. What shocked investigators most was his utter lack of remorse. His behavior from the very beginning suggested profound psychological instability. Mental health professionals evaluated him and diagnosed him with borderline personality disorder. He struggled with explosive anger, impulsivity, and a severe dependence on hard prohibited substances, yet no one had ever ensured he received treatment in a specialized facility. When speaking about his past, Elia often described the family environment as far from harmonious. Contrary to the image the Del Grande family presented to the outside world, he recalled with bitterness the years he spent living with his grandmother and aunt, describing them as a time of deep loneliness. According to him, both women resorted to physical punishment to control him. He said, feeling unloved and mistreated had caused lasting psychological trauma. Elia portrayed his mother not as a warm, affectionate figure, but as a harsh, controlling woman who used yelling, insults, and physical discipline to enforce her rules. His father, he claimed, was no different. Psychiatric experts later testified that such an upbringing, combined with his personality traits, could have contributed to his chronic low self-esteem, emotional instability, and the persistent feeling of being judged or monitored. These factors, together with his escalating substance abuse, likely accelerated his psychological decline. After his first trial, Elia Del Grande received 3 life sentences. However, during the appeal, the court reduced the sentence to 30 years, ruling that he was only partially sane at the time of the killings. Even in prison, Elia's behavior continued to deteriorate. He attempted to escape multiple times and provoked frequent conflicts despite the high security conditions. One escape attempt actually succeeded, though only briefly. Investigators later concluded that he may have been assisted by his common-law wife, whom he had met while on a semi-open prison regime. A taxi driver proved instrumental in identifying him. He had been paid €400 by a woman to pick up someone outside the prison perimeter. During the ride, the driver noticed that the passenger kept hiding his face. Suspicious, he went to the police after completing the trip, helping authorities track down and recapture Elia. Elia was captured while trying to reach Sardinia and received an additional 8-month sentence. In practice, though, it made little difference, because he did not end up serving the full 30 years. Then came an unexpected, highly controversial development. In 2025, after serving just 25 years, Elia was granted early release, transferred to a semi-open facility in Olbia, Sardinia. The decision sparked immediate outrage. Residents were furious and frightened at the prospect of living near a man who had killed his entire family and who had repeatedly shown he was capable of violence. And almost immediately, Elia validated their fears. From the very first days, it became clear that he could not adjust to ordinary life. He frequently argued with neighbors, clashed with residents and provoked multiple complaints. Some said he harassed people. Others insisted he was simply too dangerous to be living freely within the community. As a result, his freedom was restricted once again. A court ordered him to spend 6 months in a work release facility in Castelfranco Emilia, in the province of Modena, after which his case would be reviewed again. This institution was a mixed facility where inmates of different profiles lived together. At the time of Elia's transfer, around 40 individuals classified as dangerous to society were housed there, along with another 45 prisoners in various stages of social reintegration. Many had already been granted semi-freedom, which allowed them to go into town each day for work. The decision to house a convicted triple murderer in such an environment was met with significant criticism. Even law enforcement officers acknowledged that criminals with vastly different behavioral patterns require different levels of supervision. That reality soon became painfully clear. On the evening of October 30, 2025, Elia managed to escape. Using a makeshift rope crafted from electrical cords taken from household appliances, he lowered himself from a window located on the only side of the building not protected by fencing. No one realized he was gone until the next morning's head count. Surveillance cameras captured his escape. A large-scale search operation began immediately. But the first hours yielded nothing. No inmates in the facility appeared to know anything about Elia's plan, and he left behind no obvious clues. After examining his background, detectives concluded that he was likely still in Italy, probably hiding in areas familiar to him. Patrols searched roads, bus terminals, train stations, rural paths, and abandoned farmhouses. Dozens of CCTV recordings were collected, but none led to him. Then Elia reached out himself. On November 6, Novosti Varese received a letter signed by Elia del Grande. In it, he attempted to justify his escape. He expressed remorse for his past actions but insisted he could not remain in the workhouse. He criticized the reintegration facility, describing it as a poor imitation of a real prison, one that lacked meaningful rehabilitation programs. He claimed that psychotropic medications and prohibited substances circulated freely inside, and that many inmates were forced to remain far longer than necessary simply because they had no home or family waiting for them outside. According to Elia, his escape was not an attempt to avoid punishment, but a choice driven by desperation, a way to spend the rest of his life in a more peaceful place. The letter ignited nationwide debate. On one hand, complaints about such institutions had existed for years. On the other, a man who had murdered his entire family was openly on the run and considered extremely dangerous. Authorities intensified their search. Eventually, investigators traced Elia to Lake Monate. Under cover of darkness, he used a pedal boat to cross the lake, temporarily eluding patrols on the ground. But his efforts only delayed the inevitable. After 13 days on the run, on November 12, 2025, officers located him hiding in a small house near his childhood home in Cadrazate. He offered no resistance when arrested. The investigation into his escape is still ongoing, as detectives suspect he did not act alone. Now 50 years old, Elia del Grande has been returned to custody. Even so, Elia is expected to be released again in just 4 years. His case has sparked national reflection, not only about public safety, but also about the structure and limitations of the Italian justice system. One question remains at the center of the debate. Can someone who murdered his entire family ever truly reintegrate into society? In the peaceful town of Monroe, North Carolina, Kimberly Medlin thought she understood the sources of danger in her life. She worried about intoxicated patrons at the club, unfamiliar people on desolate roads. However, she never suspected that the true danger was observing her, not from the shadows, but from behind the wheel of a police car. studying her routines, tendencies, and anxieties. This is not just the story of a brutal murder. It is the story of how one man turned the symbol of safety into a hunting license, and how a young woman, who did everything right, never made it home. Kimberly Jo Kim Millen Medlin was born on December 1, 1970. She was cheerful, bright-spirited, and had a warm, welcoming smile. People were naturally drawn to her. After graduating high school, she met the love of her life, a young man named Bridger Medlin. Around that time, she began pursuing her education and working steadily. The couple later married and settled on a small horse farm in Monroe, North Carolina. By 1997, Kim was both a student and a hard-working young woman balancing two jobs to support her small family. She was a passionate horseback rider, dreamed of owning her own riding stable one day. Bridger worked tirelessly as well. Together, they planned to finish school, build stable careers, and eventually start a family. But they had no idea that fate was quietly preparing something far darker. Kim worked as a sales associate at a clothing store and also waited tables at a popular men's club in the city. It was a loud, high-energy environment where fights sometimes broke out among intoxicated customers or occasionally even between staff. This happened often enough that Kim hardly reacted to it anymore. She and her co-workers knew how to handle rowdy patrons. Security guards typically diffused situations before they escalated. This wasn't always effective, but the establishment was well known to law enforcement. A police officer could always be called if a situation got out of hand. Such incidents occurred during Kim's shifts, but they were rare, and she managed them with her usual calm. But none of that could protect her from what happened early one March morning in 1997 as she drove home from work. At first, Kim noticed that an unfamiliar vehicle seemed to be following her as she left the club. She changed lanes, slowed down, and sped up to test her suspicion, but the car mimicked her every move. Fearful, she contacted law enforcement. By the time she pulled up behind a patrol car parked along a quiet stretch of road, the pursuer had already sped away. Perhaps realizing his intentions had been discovered, he avoided a direct encounter with the police. Deeply shaken, Kim explained the frightening incident to the officers. They took her statement seriously, reassured her, and opened a report. She admitted this wasn't the first time she had noticed someone suspicious trailing her. Officers documented everything carefully, though the details were too limited to identify the stalker. Even so, they had no intention of ignoring her warning. From that moment on, patrol officers were alerted about the suspicious individual and his vehicle. Kim returned to her routine, working and studying as usual. Only 2 weeks passed after she filed the report. At 4 a.m. on March 29, 1997, an officer on patrol spotted a red SUV pulled over on the side of the road. It didn't look like an accident. The vehicle appeared abandoned. Its engine was running, the headlights were still on, and no one was inside. When officers began examining the car, the situation immediately became alarming. Inside, they found signs of a struggle, strands of light-colored hair and several small drops of blood on the driver's side. Kim's belongings were inside, her wallet, cash, cards, and various personal items. A quick check of the license plates confirmed that the vehicle belonged to Kimberly Jo Kim Millen Medlin. But Kim herself was nowhere in sight. And just like that, a quiet countryside road became the beginning of one of North Carolina's most unsettling murder cases. The first call investigators made was to Kim's home, but no one answered. Early that same morning, her husband, Bridger Medlin, arrived at the police station in person to report that his wife had not returned home after her shift at the men's club. There was no logical explanation for Kim's disappearance, and Bridger was visibly shaken. He remembered the frightening incident weeks earlier when someone had followed her on the road, and he feared that one of the club's customers, or perhaps the same stalker, might have harmed his wife. The abandoned SUV suggested that something terrible had happened. Detectives had already processed the vehicle and found nothing of significant value inside, so they moved on to the surrounding area. Outside, they noticed markings on the ground, what looked like a faint, disturbed trail. Following it and widening the search perimeter, investigators made a grim discovery the very next day. Kim's body had been dumped at the end of a dead-end road, roughly 3 kilometers from where her SUV had been found. Nothing had been taken from the vehicle. Jewelry was still on her body, her wedding ring remained on her finger, and a gold bracelet was still on her wrist. It was immediately clear this had not been a robbery. Kim had been brutally beaten. According to the autopsy, she sustained multiple blows, punched, kicked, and strangled over a prolonged period. There were no signs of abuse, but her back and neck were covered in severe bruises. Many of the marks had a distinctive shape, yet they did not match any common weapon either. The violence had been intense and deliberate. Even in areas of skin that are usually thick and therefore less prone to bruising, deep bruises can still be found. The perpetrator seemed to harbor fierce hatred for his victim. Based on the injuries, Kim appeared to have been ambushed from behind, forced to the ground, and subjected to immense pressure on her back and neck, possibly from the killer stomping on her, causing fractures. There was also evidence indicating she had been restrained. Marks around her wrists suggested immobilization, though no bindings were recovered at the scene. The impressions did not match tape, rope, or zip ties. Experienced forensic experts noted the pattern was highly unusual. To understand who might have attacked the defenseless young woman, detectives began reconstructing her final hours. Her family and close friends cooperated fully. On the surface, none of the people in Kim's life seemed aggressive or dangerous. She had no history of mental illness, substance dependency, or risky social circles. She lived quietly and stayed away from trouble. The only environment that raised concern was her workplace. The men's club drew a wide range of customers, and tensions could escalate easily. Investigators questioned her co-workers, many of whom believed Kim's killer was likely a problematic patron. According to Kim's colleagues, she had finished her shift around 2:00 a.m. As usual, they also provided her complaint about being followed on the street, which they believe is relevant. The detectives then questioned her husband. Bridger confirmed that she called him at that time to let him know she was leaving the club, a routine she never broke. Phone records later verified his statement. Her commute normally lasted only 10 minutes. To save time, she always took a quiet, isolated shortcut road. It was along that same road that her SUV had been discovered, engine running, lights on, but driver missing. Bridger said that after speaking to Kim, he went to bed, exhausted from his long day at work. But when he woke up and started getting ready for his shift, he realized Kim had never returned home and immediately contacted police. His missing person report was filed, but detectives soon identified 2 concerning inconsistencies. First, no one could confirm that Bridger was actually home at the time he claimed. Only the phone record proved Kim had called the house. After that call, he had more than enough time to commit the crime. Second, detectives questioned his account of falling asleep so easily. How could he have gone to bed without waiting for his wife to return from a late-night shift? And how did he not notice her absence until morning? His delayed report raised doubts. Despite these concerns, Bridger behaved calmly and appeared devastated. At first glance, he seemed suspicious, but he acted very calmly. He seemed like a sincerely grieving widower who had lost his beloved. When investigators began verifying Bridger Medlin's statements, several witnesses stepped forward claiming they had seen a black van resembling his driving through town around the time Kim went missing. Bridger firmly denied any involvement, insisting he had been home the entire night. Detectives still lacked evidence to charge him with anything. But the conflicting accounts forced them to slow down and re-examine every detail. Family, friends, and colleagues were interviewed extensively to help investigators understand the dynamics of the couple's relationship. Everyone described Bridger as attentive, hard-working, and deeply devoted to his wife. Like any married couple, they had minor disagreements, but nothing even close to violent or hostile. Detectives tried to identify a motive, yet none emerged. The Medlins had no life insurance policies, no significant assets, no children, no affairs, and no discussions of divorce, factors that often contribute to spousal homicides. Suspicion surrounding Bridger weakened further when another witness came forward, claiming that Bridger's van had remained parked in the driveway all night. Although his alibi was far from airtight, investigators no longer considered him their primary focus. Attention shifted to other avenues. Based on the timeline, Kim had called her husband before driving home. She then continued along her usual route, a quiet suburban stretch of highway, before stopping unexpectedly. There was nothing on that road to make her pull over voluntarily. Detectives began to suspect that Kim had stopped because she believed she was being pulled over by law enforcement. This theory also explained the unusual marks on her wrists. Forensic examiners recognized the pattern instantly: pressure injuries consistent with metal handcuffs applied far too tightly. Then, an unexpected development occurred. A man arrived at the police station, claiming he was the same driver Kim had reported weeks earlier, the one who followed her from the men's club. He insisted he had nothing to do with her murder. He admitted he had been drunk that night and acted out of anger because Kim had removed him from the club 2 weeks earlier for inappropriate behavior. Wanting to scare her, he followed her car, but backed off when she neared a location where patrol officers usually parked. He said he came forward because he had heard that a waitress from the club had been killed and didn't want police hunting for him. His confession seemed genuine, but his alibi still had to be checked. Investigators soon confirmed he was telling the truth. On the night of Kim's murder, he had been at work during an overnight shift. Multiple co-workers and his manager backed him up. CCTV footage with timestamps also confirmed his presence. He was ruled out completely. And just like that, the list of suspects was empty again. Detectives felt trapped in a standstill. No one believed Bridger was guilty, neither Kim's family nor his own. Everyone knew him as a gentle, even-tempered man. The marriage showed no signs of trouble. There was still no motive at all. With no progress, investigators held a press conference, hoping someone from the public had seen something unusual on that isolated road during the early morning hours. Their request paid off. A motorist came forward, saying he had seen a patrol car following a vehicle matching the description of Kim's red SUV. He explained that he had driven behind both vehicles for a short distance and noticed how unnaturally synchronized their movements were, close enough to raise concern. At the time, he dismissed it. Only after watching the news did he realize the significance. Investigators showed him photographs of patrol cars from nearby jurisdictions. Based on the details he remembered, they concluded the car appeared to be a Monroe Police Department patrol vehicle. The possibility was chilling. The killer might have been someone wearing a badge. Because all patrol cars in Monroe were identical models, the witness could not identify the exact unit number, but his account aligned perfectly with the new theory. It explained why Kim had stopped on a deserted highway. She likely believed she was being pulled over by an officer she trusted, or at least someone who looked like one. By this point, investigators had already analyzed every piece of evidence they collected, but the new lead forced them to re-examine everything, especially hoping to find fingerprints or trace materials they might have missed the first time. Unfortunately, nothing useful surfaced. That was not entirely surprising. If the killer really was connected to law enforcement, he would have known exactly how to avoid leaving any trace behind. A follow-up inspection finally revealed something investigators had overlooked: a distinctive imprint left on Kim's sweatshirt. Forensic analysis determined that it was the heel mark of a woman's shoe, not a sneaker or standard boot. Alongside it was another peculiar marking, a small V-shaped imprint. The experts began searching for the manufacturer. At first, he found nothing. No popular brands used a heel design or lettering like this. He then shifted to small-scale or specialized footwear producers. He examined hundreds of models, visited stores in person, and checked suppliers who made shoes for niche professions. That was when he found an exact match. The shoes were produced by a small manufacturer in Wisconsin, a company so specialized and obscure that even in that industry, few people had heard of it. They made only a few dozen models, and one of them had the exact same heel pattern and the same letter imprint found on Kim's clothing. The next step was to determine the killer's size. By reconstructing the pressure marks and depth of the imprint, the forensic lab concluded that the perpetrator wore size 39-40. In only a matter of days, the focus of the investigation narrowed dramatically. The killer was likely a Monroe police officer wearing this rare shoe model. When detectives checked the boots of officers in the department, they found 3 who owned this exact model. 1 wore size 39 and 2 wore size 40. The first officer worked for the fire division and had been on duty the entire night of the murder. He had no connection to Kim, did not frequent the men's club, and had a strong, independently verified alibi. He was immediately removed from the list. The second officer had spent the night investigating a robbery. He was stationed at an elderly couple's house on the opposite end of town and remained in constant radio contact with dispatch. His alibi was airtight. The third officer was Josh Griffin. On the night Kim was murdered, Griffin had worked until 10 o'clock p.m. According to his statement, he went straight home afterward. What immediately drew attention was that he had patrolled the very stretch of highway where Kim's abandoned SUV was later found. Griffin claimed he had seen nothing unusual that night, no stopped vehicles, no suspicious activity. In theory, this made sense. By the time Kimberly left the men's club around 2 o'clock a.m., Josh Griffin should have been asleep at home. He insisted that after his shift he did nothing else, saying he had been too exhausted to leave his house. Investigators inspected Griffin's patrol car first. What they found was unsettling. The inside of the vehicle was spotless, as if it had been aggressively cleaned very recently. They immediately flagged this as suspicious. Griffin had a reputation for being exceptionally untidy. For years, the department joked that his patrol car was the filthiest in the fleet and that anyone riding with him practically needed to wash their clothes afterward. Yet now, after Kim's murder, the same car was immaculate, cleaner than it had ever been since the day it was issued to him. Griffin dismissed the comments, insisting everyone was exaggerating, but investigators' suspicions were already growing. When detectives searched Griffin's home, they were especially interested in his footwear. The distinctive boots he was known to wear, the exact model that matched the imprint on Kim's sweatshirt, were nowhere to be found. When questioned, Josh claimed he had thrown them away because they had torn during his last investigation. But according to multiple colleagues, Griffin wore that particular model constantly and had never mentioned them being damaged. Suspicions surrounding Officer Josh Griffin grew even stronger. Once investigators revisited interviews with Kim's colleagues at the men's club, they confirmed that Josh was a familiar face there, a regular customer known for his temper, unsettling behavior. He often acted defiant, used his badge as a shield to intimidate people. He was generally avoided by both staff and patrons. Female employees, in particular, recalled how disrespectful and aggressive he could be. But everything changed when he first noticed Kim. It was clear he was immediately drawn to her. He repeatedly tried to strike up conversations, but Kim, modest, reserved, and married, turned him down every time. She did not like Josh, and the two had engaged in several verbal confrontations at the club, though none were serious enough to warrant formal complaints. Investigators now needed to dismantle Josh's alibi, which claimed he had been home asleep at the time of the murder. They seized his cell phone as part of the investigation. The records revealed a call made at 2 o'clock a.m. Not from his home, but from his patrol car. Despite the limited precision of cell tower triangulation at the time, detectives determined he had been parked at an intersection just outside the men's club parking lot. The spot provided a perfect view of the club entrance. It was now clear that Josh had not been home at all. When confronted with these findings, he changed his story. He claimed that after his shift ended, he had simply stayed in his patrol car to read a book. The call at 2 o'clock a.m., he said, was him requesting a tow truck for a stranger who had approached him for help with a broken-down vehicle. This new explanation only raised more questions. According to the timeline, Kim drove past that exact intersection roughly 30 minutes later, taking her usual shortcut home. Josh Griffin, therefore, had ample opportunity to follow her without raising suspicion, as he was in full uniform and driving a marked police car. Even so, Josh continued to deny any involvement. Because the evidence was still circumstantial, he was released pending further investigation. More troubling information emerged shortly afterward. Several of Griffin's co-workers admitted they had heard him talk repeatedly about a girl in a red SUV he found attractive. He had made comments, some inappropriate, about Kim more than once. It became clear that his interest in her was not casual but obsessive. As rumors spread that the killer might be a police officer, Monroe's police department initially resisted the idea. No one wanted a scandal implicating one of their own, but the leak proved unexpectedly helpful. Multiple young women came forward reporting that a patrol officer had harassed them. They described being followed in their cars, approached on isolated roads, and confronted in public places. The pattern was unmistakable. Josh Griffin had used his badge to intimidate women for years. But Kim had rejected him firmly, and that rejection only intensified his fixation. Soon, the theory became clear. Investigators believed Griffin had driven to the area near the club specifically because he knew Kim would be leaving work. He had studied her routine and waited until the perfect moment. They suspected he followed her onto the rural road where she usually drove home. Then, using the authority of his uniform and patrol car, he forced her to pull over. She likely believed it was an ordinary traffic stop, until she realized the truth. Detectives reconstructed the likely sequence of events. Griffin handcuffed Kim, dragged her off the road, and launched into a sustained attack. He beat her, choked her using what was likely a police flashlight, and applied such force to her neck, back that he fractured her vertebrae, standing on her body with full weight. That was when the distinctive heel imprint from his shoe pressed into her sweatshirt. In February 1998, Josh Griffin was charged with kidnapping and first-degree murder. He continued to deny all accusations, but the evidence against him had grown overwhelming. During the preliminary hearing, numerous witnesses testified, including the motorist who had reported seeing a patrol car tailing Kim's SUV, several officers who worked alongside Griffin, and multiple women who had previously been harassed by him. The defense attempted to portray Griffin as a respectable officer, but the community knew better. Witness after witness described his volatile temper, inappropriate comments, and reckless abuse of authority. In February 1998, after closing arguments from both the prosecution and the defense, the jury deliberated for only a few hours before returning with a unanimous verdict. Josh Griffin was found guilty on all charges. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Years went by before Griffin finally requested a recorded interview with investigators. In that meeting, he admitted to everything. He said he couldn't fully explain what pushed him to commit such a horrific act, but he confirmed much of what detectives had long suspected. He acknowledged that he tried to approach Kim multiple times, and when she firmly rejected him, something inside him snapped. He confessed that he kidnapped her, handcuffed her, beat her, stomped on her, and strangled her with his police flashlight. After killing her, he took her driver's license. Griffin said he tore it into tiny pieces and flushed them down the toilet. As for the missing pair of shoes, he admitted that he discarded them in a dumpster behind a local supermarket on the same morning of the murder. He realized those distinctive footprints could track him down and panicked. By confessing, Josh Griffin said he finally felt he had cleared his conscience. His sentence, however, remains unchanged. What happened to Kim is more than a tragic crime. It is a warning, a reminder that power without integrity becomes a weapon, and that the people we depend on the most can sometimes be the ones who betray that trust in the most horrific way. Kimberly Jo Kim Millen Medlin was a daughter, a wife, a friend, a woman with dreams, goals, and a future that should never have been stolen. Her story continues to echo through Monroe. On the night of December 6, 1991, Austin, Texas, seemed as peaceful as any other weekend. But at midnight, a thick column of smoke, billowing from a small shop, awakened the entire neighborhood. None of them could have imagined that behind that black smoke lay not just a fire, but one of the most horrific crimes in Texas history. On the charred pavement, 4 nearly unrecognizable bodies lay huddled together, bound by their own clothing. In a relentless investigation spanning over 30 years, Austin police pursued dozens of suspects, face immense public pressure, make grave mistakes, and ultimately only find the true answer thanks to cutting-edge 21st-century DNA technology. This is not just a story about a massacre. It's also a story about the desperation of families seeking the truth, about irreparable mistakes in the investigation, and about the real monster that has been hiding for 3 decades. Late on Saturday night, residents of Austin, Texas, were startled by a disturbance. Multiple fire crews responded to the scene, a small commercial strip that housed a supermarket and a popular frozen yogurt shop. The fire spread rapidly. By the time firefighters arrived, the entire space was engulfed in thick black smoke. It took some time to contain the blaze, Then the investigation began. Initially, firefighters attempted to determine the source of the fire. The yogurt shop had already closed for the night, so an electrical malfunction, faulty wiring, or a damaged appliance seemed like the likely cause. No obvious ignition point was found in the main area, so investigators moved toward the back room. That was where they made a horrifying discovery. In the center of the storeroom lay 4 charred bodies, bound with pieces of clothing. All 4 victims were dead. Once the remains were examined and identified, investigators confirmed that the victims were schoolgirls. The oldest were 17-year-old Jennifer Harbison and 17-year-old Eliza Thomas, both employees of the yogurt shop. The next victim was Jennifer's younger sister, 15-year-old Sarah Harbison. She didn't work there but often kept her sister company while spending time at the mall. The youngest victim was Sarah's 13-year-old friend, Amy Ayers. The bodies of Jennifer, Sarah, and Eliza were found very close to one another and had been burned almost beyond recognition. Amy, the youngest, was found a short distance away, and because of her position, her body suffered slightly less damage. She sustained third-degree burns over roughly 30% of her body. The murders were devastating for the victims' families. The condition of the bodies made the tragedy even harder to comprehend. Now, investigators faced the enormous task of reconstructing every detail of the crime to identify whoever was responsible. At this time, Jennifer Harbison, 17 years old, is an energetic, ambitious, and hardworking girl. She was set to graduate the following year and planned to attend college afterward. Jennifer participated in sports and was a proud member, and even president, of the Future Farmers of America, a non-profit student organization focused on agricultural education. Her sister, 15-year-old Sarah, was also a student at the same school. She participated in the same organization, played basketball and volleyball, served on the student council, and was widely known as outgoing, energetic. She was dating a young man who had recently given her a ring as a symbol of his love. Tragically, that ring was later found melted beside her body. 17-year-old Eliza Thomas was also involved in the Future Farmers of America. She lived with her mother, while her father lived separately. During this period, she held 2 part-time jobs to help support her mom, even though she was still unsure of what she wanted to pursue in the future. The youngest victim, 13-year-old Amy Ayers, was a close friend of Sarah's. They didn't see each other regularly because they attended different schools, but whenever they spent time together, they enjoyed each other's company and fit naturally into the group. Amy is also a member of the same organization, Future Farmers of America, and it was through that program that she met everyone. Family members soon arrived at the scene. They cooperated fully with investigators and described the girl's day leading up to the tragedy. According to their account, Jennifer had visited her boyfriend that afternoon and then stopped by a friend's house before getting ready for her evening shift at the yogurt shop. She and Eliza were scheduled to work late, and afterward, Sarah's boyfriend was supposed to drive Jennifer home. Earlier that day, Amy and Sarah had gone to the stables, each responsible for an animal they were caring for. After leaving the stables, they decided to walk through the mall before heading to the yogurt shop to help Jennifer and Eliza close up for the night. Once closing time came, the plan was to drive home together, even though they lived nearby. This had become their usual routine for safety. Eliza's parents told investigators that nothing seemed unusual when they passed by the yogurt shop later that evening. They stopped to buy yogurt before heading home and saw no one suspicious. They also hadn't heard of any of the girls being stalked or involved in troubling relationships. None of them struggled with behavioral issues, and their rebellious phases were mild at most. Investigators then contacted the store manager. She remained composed until she was informed that 4 bodies had been found inside. The fire itself didn't initially alarm her. She was certain that no one should have been in the store at that hour. The situation felt deeply unsettling. Once it became clear that the scene was a crime scene, forensic experts arrived. They quickly determined that the girls had not died from smoke inhalation or burns. 3 of the victims, Eliza, Jennifer, and Sarah, had been shot in the back of the head with a .22 caliber weapon. Amy suffered 2 gunshot wounds, and the bullets came from a different firearm. Because all 4 girls were found naked and bound, investigators initially suspected abuse or attempted assault, but the intense fire and the water used to extinguish it made confirming that difficult. Firefighters had washed down the entire area, likely destroying crucial evidence. What was clear, however, was that the fire had been intentionally set to cover up the crime. Cardboard boxes, napkins, and disposable cups had been stacked over the girls' bodies and ignited, turning the entire space into an inferno. There was no money left in the register, prompting speculation that robbery might have been a motive. Strangely, several of the girls' undergarments and 2 black jackets were missing, suggesting that personal items had been taken. Since there were no signs of forced entry, investigators considered the possibility that the victims may have known their killers. This would explain how the perpetrators gained access without suspicion. Yet detectives also believed the attackers might have simply been late customers. The police began questioning people within the girls' immediate circle. The first person to draw attention was Eliza's ex-boyfriend, Roger. Shortly before the murders, he had asked a friend to call the store while Eliza was working and inquire about all the yogurt flavors. Eliza overheard him laughing in the background. She mentioned the strange behavior to her parents and several friends. While it didn't seem dangerous, investigators followed up on the lead. It wasn't long before Roger and his friend were cleared. He had not been stalking Eliza, nor did he harbor ill intent. The call had simply been a prank, and he had a solid alibi for the night of the murders. After that, the list of potential suspects was empty, so law enforcement increased patrols throughout the area. Officers began checking individuals with criminal histories, especially those known for violence against women. They questioned regular customers at the yogurt shop and canvassed the nearby neighborhoods in hopes of uncovering anything new. 8 days later, a witness contacted the police and reported a suspicious 16-year-old boy. He was often seen hanging around the same shopping mall where Amy and Sarah had walked. The teen drew attention because he frequently carried what appeared to be a .22 caliber gun. When he showed up at the mall again, rumors spread quickly that he and his group of friends might somehow be connected to the murders. The new suspect turned out to be a young man named Maurice Pierce, who was frequently accompanied by a friend named Forrest Wellborn. Police confiscated Maurice's gun, and he gave investigators a startling explanation. He claimed he had stolen the pistol from a 13-year-old friend named Johnny, who had taken it from his father's gun collection. Because several rounds were missing from the magazine, Maurice became a person of interest. During interrogation, he stated that on the night of the murders, he and Forrest had gone to a bar and run into a group of guys led by someone named Michael. According to Maurice, Forrest borrowed a .22 pistol from one of them and left for a short time. When he returned, several bullets were missing. He appeared distressed, telling Maurice he had done something bad. Concerning the fire, Maurice claimed it had been started with hairspray and a lighter. Investigators doubted such a large blaze could have begun that way, but Maurice continued to stick to his story. The day after the murders, Forrest and several friends stole a car. They drove out of town to the river to shoot. On their way back, they pumped gas and left without paying, so the police were called. The group was heading to San Antonio because Forrest wanted to break up with his girlfriend. After returning to Austin, Forrest borrowed the pistol again. When Maurice asked why, Forrest allegedly replied that he planned to kill more girls, just as he had done in the yogurt shop. After gathering multiple witness statements, detectives agreed that the group's behavior seemed suspicious. Members of the group had indeed been at the same shopping center around the time of the murders and had even stopped by a frozen yogurt shop. This prompted investigators to arrest Maurice, Forrest, and 2 of their friends, Robert Springsteen and Michael Scott. These 2 had been with the group when they stole the car and left Austin briefly. Police also believed a girl had been with them at some point, so detectives interviewed her as well. All of them were troubled teens who had dropped out of school, though not all had criminal records. None admitted involvement in the murders, but Maurice agreed to cooperate. Investigators wired a microphone under his clothing and sent him to speak with Forrest. Later, Forrest said he didn't understand why Maurice was asking incriminating questions and insisted he had simply made a tasteless joke about the murders. After a lengthy investigation, detectives realized they had been misled. Maurice had fabricated much of his story during questioning to appear important. All 4 young men were eventually released, and investigators shifted their focus elsewhere. Because of the severity of the crime, a growing number of witnesses came forward, each with a different account. All were investigated, but none proved reliable. detectives managed to interview nearly every customer who had visited the yogurt shop that Saturday night. Eventually, a young married couple, Tim and Margaret, came forward. They had purchased yogurt shortly before closing time. While waiting for her order, Margaret noticed two men sitting at a nearby table. Their behavior struck her as odd. They sat almost motionless, seemingly listening closely to the girls at the register and behind the counter. Tim and Margaret left shortly after, as the store was preparing to close, but the two suspicious men remained inside. Unfortunately, Tim and Margaret couldn't describe them clearly. Their faces weren't visible enough. Hypnosis was even attempted, but it produced no useful results. The police had little information, perhaps because the crime scene was examined by around 100 people, who may have contaminated the area and weakened the integrity of the investigation. Even determining how the fire had been started remained unclear. The most plausible explanation was that the killers had used some kind of accelerant to set the victims on fire. But despite extensive searches and forensic testing, investigators were unable to identify exactly what substance had been used. During this time, the victims' families endured not only the devastation of losing their daughters but also relentless media attention. They faced a painful dilemma. No one wanted to repeatedly revisit the horror of the crime, yet speaking publicly seemed necessary to keep the case alive in the minds of detectives, journalists, and the community. They knew that remaining visible might help push the investigation forward. With no promising suspects in the quadruple homicide, Austin police turned to the Federal Bureau of Investigation for assistance. Investigators hoped a criminal profiler could at least help narrow down the type of perpetrator they were dealing with. According to the profile, the murders were likely committed by more than one person, with one dominant leader. The offenders were believed to be white males between 19 and 25 years old, likely high school dropouts with prior criminal histories. The dominant offender was thought to be emotionally unstable, prone to violent outbursts, especially when under the influence of alcohol or illegal substances. He has a history of violence against young, vulnerable women. Unfortunately, this psychological portrait produced no meaningful leads. As a result, Austin detectives started exploring more unconventional theories, including the possibility that the murders were connected to a satanic cult. They conducted background checks on individuals rumored to be involved in such activities, but this avenue also led nowhere. Every investigative strategy failed to bring them closer to the truth, and the case stalled. In 1999, authorities decided to replace the lead detective. The new investigator began reviewing all available evidence, but the sheer volume of conflicting information made the task overwhelming. Once again, attention turned toward Maurice and his group of friends, who had seemed suspicious from the start. By this time, all of them were in their 20s. They were called in for fresh interrogations, and for the most part, their accounts remained the same. Investigators then noticed that the stories of Michael Scott and Robert Springsteen, who had previously been pressured during questioning, had changed the most. Their confessions contained numerous inconsistencies. Eventually, after lengthy interrogations, detectives assembled a narrative. Around 11:00 p.m., the four girls were preparing to close the yogurt shop, but allowed the remaining young men to finish their food. These young men, according to the confession-based reconstruction, were the killers. The girls locked the doors and flipped the sign, but one of the alleged perpetrators pulled out a gun and aimed it at Eliza at the register. From there, the robbery spiraled out of control. According to the police theory, the girls were brutally assaulted, then shot and burned in an effort to destroy evidence. The trial of Robert and Michael began in 2001. The prosecution relied heavily on their confessions and several witness statements. Meanwhile, the defense emphasized the glaring inaccuracies and procedural violations that tainted the confessions from the very beginning. Beyond those statements, the prosecution had almost no physical evidence conclusively linking the men to the murders. Even so, after several weeks, the jury found both defendants guilty. Springsteen was sentenced to death, and Scott was sentenced to life imprisonment. In 2005, Springsteen, who was 17 at the time, had his sentence commuted to life in prison by Governor Rick Perry as a result of Roper v. Simmons. The defense attorneys argued that neither defendant had the opportunity to commit the crime. Under intense police pressure, the two young men had been coerced into incriminating one another, and the defense insisted on exercising their full right to cross-examine every witness the prosecution relied on. Their efforts paid off. They demonstrated that the confessions had been extracted under duress, at gunpoint, on the second day of interrogation. Other law enforcement officers later confirmed this. The video recordings of the interrogations were eventually located and submitted in court. Both Robert and Michael testified that they were beaten, insulted, threatened, and humiliated for days until detectives finally obtained what they wanted: forced confessions to the murders. The prosecution suffered its most serious blow when the defense proved that critical information had been misrepresented at trial. The .22 caliber pistol seized from Maurice had been definitively ruled out as the murder weapon after ballistic testing, yet prosecutors continued claiming in court that it was the gun used to execute the victims. In 2006, an appeals court overturned all charges against Michael Scott. 3 years later, in 2009, Robert Springsteen was also cleared. Both men were freed. Public outrage soon erupted against law enforcement, as it became clear that wrongful convictions were not isolated errors but part of a larger pattern. The scandal triggered internal reviews, renewed scrutiny of interrogation methods, and widespread criticism of practices that had ruined the lives of innocent people. The victims' parents told reporters that they never wanted anyone innocent to go to prison. Revenge was not their goal. They only wanted justice, and for the true killer to be held accountable. Yet the central question remained unanswered: who had murdered the 4 girls? The investigation stalled once again. No new evidence emerged, and the old evidence had failed at every stage. Over the years, technology continued to advance. In 2017, a partial DNA profile was discovered during a reanalysis of samples collected from the victims' bodies. This yielded a partial profile that did not match any of the victims. Only 16 genetic markers were found. This number is alarmingly small, but it's enough to compare with other samples and potentially rule out suspects through comparison. Investigators first compared the sample with the profiles of Forrest, Maurice, Michael, and Robert. All were excluded. None matched the DNA from the crime scene. By the end of 2017, detectives discovered that a nearly identical DNA fragment had been stored in a national database. After further analysis, they learned this same unknown profile had appeared in at least one other unsolved crime in the FBI system. The offender had reoffended, but had never been identified. The investigation remained stuck until the yogurt shop murders resurfaced in the public consciousness. Thanks to documentary filmmakers and the persistence of the victims' families, pressure on the case renewed. Another round of DNA comparisons was conducted, and this time, detectives finally discovered the truth. 2 days after the Austin yogurt shop murders, a man had been arrested in El Paso, Texas, while trying to cross the border into Mexico. He was caught driving a stolen car and carrying a firearm. His name was Robert Eugene Brashers. Investigators later learned that Brashers was a violent serial offender, an abuser and murderer responsible for a string of brutal crimes committed between 1990 and 1998 across multiple states, including Kentucky, Missouri, Texas, and South Carolina. Yet, during his lifetime, he was never openly identified as a suspect in any of these cases. Despite his lengthy criminal record, Brashers' involvement in these crimes only came to light decades after his death. This breakthrough was possible solely because of advances in forensic genetic genealogy. Robert Eugene Brashers was born in Newport News, Virginia, raised in Alabama, later served in the U.S. Army. As a young man, he had no serious criminal history, though he was known to use illegal substances and commit minor offenses. In 1980, he moved to the southern United States and initially appeared to lead an ordinary life. He married, had a daughter, later adopted 2 more girls. However, behind this facade of normalcy was an increasingly unstable and dangerous man. His first abuse occurred in 1985 when he pretended to be intoxicated and attacked Michelle Wilkerson in Florida. He abused her after she attempted to resist, then shot her twice, once in the neck and once in the head. Against all odds, she survived and was able to identify him. Her testimony led to Brashers' arrest and conviction. He received a 12-year prison sentence but was released after just 4 years for good behavior on May 4, 1989. Soon after his release from prison, Brashers quickly returned to criminal behavior. He was arrested several times for robbery, trespassing, and illegal possession of firearms. His instability grew more apparent with each passing year. According to family members, his behavior shifted from unpredictable to openly threatening. Later, his daughter Deborah recalled a disturbing incident. Her father once filmed himself cutting into his own leg with a saw, as if testing how much pain he could endure. It was one of many signs that something was deeply wrong. In January 1999, police finally tracked him to a motel in Missouri, where he was hiding with his wife and daughters. Brashers had been pulled over in connection with a carjacking, but instead of surrendering, he opened fire on law enforcement officers. He then barricaded himself inside the motel room and took his family hostage. Negotiators managed to convince him to release them unharmed, but before officers could make an arrest, Brashers turned the gun on himself, shooting himself in the head. He died 6 days later. Only after his death did investigators begin to connect him to a series of violent crimes. Through the use of genetic genealogy, his DNA was matched to multiple unsolved murders and abuse cases. Evidence linked him to the killings of young women in South Carolina, the 1998 Missouri murders, and a pattern of attacks and abuses in Tennessee. Yet, despite this growing body of evidence, it took decades for detectives to confirm his involvement in one of the most infamous cases in Texas history. It wasn't until 2025 that Austin police finally obtained indisputable proof that Robert Eugene Brashers was responsible for the murders of the 4 teenagers in the yogurt shop in 1991. Advanced DNA testing, combined with modern ballistic analysis of archived evidence, revealed a direct match. The .22 caliber pistol used in the Austin murders turned out to be the same weapon with which Brashers had shot himself during the motel standoff in 1999. When the victims' families learned that the killer had taken his own life decades earlier, some described him as a coward, someone who chose an easy escape rather than facing justice. Detectives also believe he killed himself because he suspected he had been exposed and wanted to take all of his secrets to the grave. Yet one haunting question remains, even now: how many more victims might there have been? Just days before the most important law exam of her life, Lauren Teresa Giddings suddenly disappeared. No text messages, no calls, no sign that she had left home. Her apartment remained locked, her belongings intact, her car still in the parking lot, but she was nowhere to be seen. The suspicious silence was just the beginning. Soon after, a strange smell emanated from the apartment building's trash can area. When police opened the black bag inside, all hope instantly vanished. It contained the body of a woman. From that moment, the peaceful apartment complex became the scene of a real nightmare. The most horrifying thing isn't just the body, but also someone in the crowd that day. Someone actively involved in the search for Lauren. Someone who appeared on television, looking panicked, and also the only one who refused police permission to search their apartment. Who had been stalking Lauren for months? Why were her apartment broken into without any sign of forced entry? And why did a seemingly harmless friend suddenly change his demeanor the moment news of the garbage bag was revealed? This story will lead you into one of the most chilling cases, where the villain can be closer than you imagine. Lauren Teresa Giddings was born on April 18, 1984, in Maryland. She had loving parents and 2 younger sisters with whom she was very close. From a young age, she had a strong religious belief and a desire to help others. Therefore, she decided to pursue a career as a prosecutor to protect those who couldn't afford legal fees. She attended Mercer University in Macon, Georgia, where she graduated with honors and served as president of the Student Law Club. During her time in university, she interned at a law firm in Atlanta and started a relationship with a man named David. After completing her studies, Lauren and David maintained a long-distance relationship, planning to get married once she graduated. In June 2011, she received her degree at 18 years old. but she still needed to prepare for her important bar exam. Lauren dedicated several weeks to study, taking a short break for her sister's wedding in Maryland. Returning to Georgia, Lauren attended a year-end party with fellow students and then informed her family that she would be focusing solely on exam preparation, requesting not to be disturbed. After that, she stopped communicating with anyone, and her friends and family initially assumed she was just busy studying. However, a few days later, on June 29th, her younger sister began to worry. She was on her honeymoon and frequently sent photos to Lauren. But Lauren wasn't opening those messages. This struck her as suspicious. Even knowing Lauren was studying for exams, her failure to check messages for several days straight seemed odd. She reached out to one of Lauren's friends and asked her to check in. The friend first tried to call but found Lauren's phone turned off. She then went to Lauren's apartment, which was located across from the university and primarily inhabited by students. The friend and her boyfriend arrived and found Lauren's car parked in the lot, but no one answered when they knocked. They had to use a spare key to get inside. The apartment was very messy, but there was a logical reason for that. Lauren planned to move in with David soon after, so there were bags and suitcases scattered everywhere. Although she wasn't there, her purse, phone, and laptop were still there. Everything was strange. No one knew where Lauren could have gone, leaving all her belongings and her car behind. Her friend contacted other acquaintances, and they immediately began searching for Lauren. They searched the campus and surrounding streets, but couldn't find her. As news of her disappearance spread, her relatives drove from Maryland to Georgia. Her friends continued searching but without luck, leading them to eventually contact the police. Officers arrived at the apartment complex and searched the apartment, finding no signs of forced entry or struggle. However, they agreed that Lauren's sudden disappearance was suspicious and called forensic experts. When luminol was sprayed to detect blood, they initially found nothing. But in the bathroom, it revealed a significant amount of blood in the bathtub. Based on this discovery, investigators suspected that Lauren might not be alive. As they concentrated on locating her body, one officer noticed a strong odor outside, which smelled like decomposition. Following the scent, he discovered it was emanating from a nearby garbage container. Upon inspecting, he found a large black bag containing a female torso. Although they couldn't identify the deceased due to the missing head, investigators were nearly certain it was Lauren. They decided to handle the situation carefully, withholding information about the remains to protect the investigation. The discovery of her body was the result of several unfortunate coincidences. Police officers arrived at the apartment complex just minutes before the garbage truck arrived to collect the containers. They parked their car in a way that prevented the garbage truck from accessing the area. Had this not happened, the remains could have been taken to the landfill, and it is likely that no one would have found them there. While waiting for confirmation of the deceased's identity and considering their next steps, investigators learned something noteworthy. Lauren's relatives informed the police that she had often complained about strange occurrences in her apartment, feeling as though someone was moving her belongings while she was out. There were no signs of forced entry, and her door was always locked. This situation lasted for a long time, making Lauren wonder if she was going crazy. She also sensed that someone was watching her, although she never actually saw anyone. To feel more secure, she purchased an anti-burglar device that locked the door from the inside. But the odd incidents continued. Just before she disappeared, Lauren expressed her concerns to her boyfriend, David, who reassured her that it was likely just pranksters and not a real threat. The police quickly checked David's alibi and confirmed that he had been out of state for several days, eliminating him as a suspect. Meanwhile, forensic technicians searched Lauren's apartment for fingerprints or evidence, but found that someone had cleaned thoroughly and washed all surfaces. They decided to remove the entire bathroom for lab analysis, hoping to uncover new leads through DNA testing. Medical experts confirmed that the torso found belonged to Lauren and officially classified the case as murder. They estimated that the murder had occurred around June 26, nearly 3 days before friends and family began searching for her. However, they could not determine the exact cause of death or find any signs of struggle. Although investigators tried to keep the information confidential, the incident attracted media attention to the apartment complex. Rumors quickly spread that police had found a body. Even though Lauren's family hadn't been informed yet, the investigators decided to interview all of Lauren's neighbors and inspect their apartments, in case one of them was the perpetrator. All residents, who were fellow university students, consented to the searches, except for one 25-year-old Stephen McDaniel, living in the adjacent apartment. Stephen refused to let the officers in, stating that as a law student, he valued his privacy and had nothing to hide. This raised suspicions among investigators. They discovered that Stephen had participated in the search for Lauren since the previous day and had spoken to journalists that same morning. He was a friend of Lauren's and attended the same classes as her. Lauren was the president of the Law Students Club, and Stephen was the vice president, meaning he knew her well but still opted not to allow police into his apartment. Meanwhile, Stephen remained actively involved in the apartment complex's activities. He followed police officers around, chatted with other residents, and even gave an interview to a local news station. During that interview, he recounted how he and Lauren's friends entered her apartment and helped search the neighborhood for her. Notably, he referred to her in the past tense, despite the fact that her body had not yet been publicly confirmed as discovered. When rumors emerged that the police had possibly found a body near the dumpsters, Stephen suddenly became quiet and noticeably changed his behavior, stopping his responses to questions. When asked if he was okay, he stated that he needed to sit down. He resumed answering questions but appeared genuinely shocked by the news of the body's discovery. After the journalists left, he remained in the same spot, staring blankly for several hours. Eventually, Stephen informed the police that he allowed them to search his apartment. Investigators first noticed an accumulation of various items in his apartment, including hoarded food, energy drinks, and weapons. However, they were particularly intrigued by a master key that could unlock all the doors in the apartment complex, as well as a spare key specifically for Lauren's apartment. Stephen confessed to breaking into several neighboring apartments while the residents were away. His confession led to his arrest for theft, and he was taken to the station for questioning. While searching his apartment, police discovered a saw package, which was concerning since the victim's limbs and head had been severed. Additionally, they found 2 USB drives containing illegal material involving minors and some women's underwear in his closet. A check of Stephen's computer revealed that he frequently accessed Lauren's social media accounts. He had viewed violent adult content and, according to the browsing history, had also opened her pictures at the same time. Furthermore, he had been active on a forum where he wrote stories about the murder and torture of women. One of his last internet searches was for the garbage collection schedule in their city. This accumulation of evidence led detectives to believe he was involved in the murder, suggesting he was obsessed with Lauren, especially since he had a key to her apartment and she had reported a break-in. However, there was still no direct evidence tying him to the crime. During the interrogation, the detectives tried to get Stephen to confess, but he behaved strangely. He only answered briefly and vaguely, like yes, no, and that he didn't know, which frustrated the detectives. They attempted to convince him that his DNA had been found at the crime scene, urging him to confess to reduce his potential punishment. As someone trained in law, Stephen was not swayed by their tactics. The detectives eventually left him alone in the interrogation room, where he sat for a long time, staring into space. After questioning, they asked him to remove his t-shirt to examine his body for recent injuries and noticed several scratches that might have been caused by fingernails. He claimed not to know how they got there and suggested he might have scratched himself while sleeping. Understanding he wouldn't confess, the police shifted their focus to gathering evidence. They meticulously searched the apartment complex and made a significant discovery in the maintenance room. They found a saw that matched the packaging from Stephen's apartment. Forensic experts determined that it had been cleaned, but they still found traces of human skin belonging to Lauren. The investigators traced the saw's purchase to a specific store and obtained surveillance footage from that day, confirming that Stephen had bought it. They also checked the maintenance worker's alibi, which cleared him for the day of Lauren's murder, leaving Stephen as the only person with a key to every door, including that of the maintenance room. Following this, investigators delved deeper into Stephen's character by speaking with acquaintances. They described him as reclusive and peculiar, yet highly intelligent. They recounted how he would often pose two unusual questions to new acquaintances: how they would survive a zombie apocalypse and how they would commit the perfect murder. This odd behavior left him with very few friends, and his fellow students had no interaction with him outside of university. Many people remarked that Lauren was the only one who attempted to build a friendly relationship with Stephen. Although his behavior was strange, she still tried to be nice to him. During the 3 years they lived next to each other, Stephen asked her out multiple times, but she always politely declined. He spent most of his free time at home, focusing on his studies. His windows were covered with curtains, and he never had guests over. After Stephen's arrest, police continued searching for evidence, but without success. They tried searching for Lauren's body but were also unsuccessful. However, they discovered a pair of women's underwear in Stephen's apartment, and testing confirmed it belonged to Lauren. Another shocking piece of evidence was found on a memory card in Stephen's apartment, a video showing him holding a stick with a camera attached to it up to Lauren's window just hours before she was murdered. This led all the investigators to believe Stephen was involved in the murder. A few weeks after being arrested, he was charged with 30 counts related to the possession of sensitive documents concerning children. While preparing for his trial, Stephen maintained his innocence, even as the prosecution planned to seek the death penalty. He hired a lawyer who had once taught Lauren, who argued that the police were framing Stephen and may have planted the evidence in his apartment. The lawyer also tried to persuade the judge not to impose the death penalty, as Lauren had previously opposed it. Nevertheless, the judge sided with the prosecution. The preparation for the trial dragged on for years, and the prosecution realized that with the current evidence, Stephen could avoid conviction. The death penalty required clear evidence, while the police evidence was indirect, allowing his lawyer to create doubt among the jury. Ultimately, the prosecution offered Stephen a plea deal. The charge of possessing minor-related material would be dropped, and the death penalty waived if he pleaded guilty and revealed the details of his crime. In 2014, 3 years after Lauren's death, he accepted the deal. According to Stephen, at 1:30 a.m., he dressed in black, including a mask and gloves, and entered Lauren's apartment with a key. He bypassed the security lock and watched her sleep for a bit. When the floor creaked, it woke Lauren, and she told him to leave. Instead, he attacked her, choking her as she tried to escape. After about 15 minutes, he believed she was dead. He moved her body to the bathroom and left it until the next day. The following evening, Stephen returned with tools, including a metal saw, and dismembered her body within hours. He packed the remains into plastic bags and disposed of them in various dumpsters near the university. He threw the torso into a dumpster next to an apartment building, hoping it would be picked up soon. Afterwards, he cut up his t-shirt, gloves, and mask and flushed them down the toilet. Stephen later claimed he didn't understand why he killed Lauren, saying he was confused afterward and thought she was still alive, which is why he participated in the search for her. However, the prosecution contended that Stephen was obsessed with her, citing his frequent visits to her social media and the video taken through her window. His forum posts and history of consuming violent content suggested he fantasized about causing harm to women. With Lauren set to move out soon, they believed Stephen may have decided to kill her, knowing he would never see her again. In any case, his confession was enough for a conviction. and he received a life sentence with the possibility of early release in 2041. 4 years later, Stephen filed an appeal, this time representing himself. He claimed that the police had violated his rights from the start of the investigation. During questioning, they yelled at him and denied him bathroom access without permission. Stephen also reported suffering a seizure due to the stress. The investigators, however, refused to allow doctors to examine him unless he consented to a search of his apartment. Additionally, he criticized his former lawyer for inadequate representation. The lawyer argued that Stephen had received a prison sentence with the possibility of a one-time release instead of facing the